There's also going to be some look at the new world order that President Trump is creating.
It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Wednesday, January 21st, 2026. Thank you for joining me today. We've talked a lot over, this last 6 months at the very least, around the network state agenda, the transition, as I see it, of society, and the interesting connection that that has to, I guess you could frame it as the Democrats' version of the transition of society called the Great Reset. But it's not hard to step back and look and recognize that all the agendas seem to line up. They call them different things, frame them a little differently, give them different buzzwords. The outcome seems to be the same. And what I find really revealing is yet again having Donald Trump speak at Davos. And yeah, just like last time, a little bit of window dressing. Like last time, they yelled very strongly against woke pronouns and then completely endorsed the larger agenda that nobody wants to get into in action. Same thing we're talking about today, which is why I framed the title the way I did. It's, the king is dead, long live the king, the sort of, or more what I was feeling from it as well, that, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. It's the same kind of game, right? For those that have watched this show long enough, you know that my opinion is that when it comes to the government, really any government for that matter, but from the U.S. perspective, the UK's very different, very similar in its own different ways, but same kind of false binary as it pertains to the United States, but multiple parties, same kind of dynamic. But the point being is that it's all a government agenda, and there's different personal opinions and agendas within all of that. But if you just take a step back and objectively look, you can see the continuity of the main agendas. War being an easy way to look at that. War is always the government in lockstep. But we're going to talk about today is not just really not even that much of a focus on the network state part of it. I will make it clear where I think this ties in. And one study, by the way, that goes over that from that perspective, what I think this is about, but largely just about what we're seeing in regard to the direction of the U.S. government and how much it aligns with, a globalism, or being a globalist is a term like many of these that have become a buzzword. It's become muddied in the partisan kind of, the lack of specific language today, using these things in broad sense or completely incorrectly. But as I've said many times recently, if you look at these terms, they have very specific definitions. So I don't know why the assumption would be that we mean anything other than what the definition states, unless I'm saying that. And the definition is quite clear. And this, at the end of the day, comes down to a force, a government, an authority, a power structure that ultimately rules over everything in a global sense. Policy, control, law, everything. And the idea is that from a globalist perspective, and some frame it as for the betterment of humanity, that if you have one ruling source, that ultimately makes everything equitable or whatever it is. From the other side, it's, different flavoring, the same kind of idea. And as we can see quite clearly, regardless of yelling certain things like America first, nationalism, their action in practice is very clearly the same type of adventurism and authoritarianism, multiple actions for global directions, AI, global race, or any number of things we've talked about, or regime changes continuing. It is the same point. Now, whether Trump knows that, and again, I of course could be wrong, that's always there, but I see it pretty clearly. And whether Trump knows that or not, whether he's acting out what he thinks is best for the country or not, I think is quite irrelevant in the sense of what we're talking about. It obviously matters what his intentions are, but intentions are difficult to prove, especially when somebody does not want to say that, and they often lie about what those are. But so today we're going to go through a couple of important points to start around Iran, around some connected points through, I think, some things about ICE, but I really wanted to make sure I focused on this today. So we put off a lot of stuff that we're going to get to a show tomorrow and probably the day after that, and continue to go through some more of the foreign policy that relates. But obviously this is important. We're talking about a what I just described. It's very difficult to not include the larger foreign policy events. But from a domestic perspective, what's happening in this country and the way the actions and policy of this government are driving, if at least very clearly affecting the policy of other countries around the world, it's important to kind of at least carve this out well enough to not, if we do a 5-hour show, this gets lost in that. So I think it's important to focus on this today. We'll start with some awareness around the Trump administration, rather, I think, just the two-party illusion and how this is very much breaking down in front of us. I still find that relevant every day. And the connective points to that tie into the starting point of, we're going to get into Iran for a little bit, but show you some larger things we've discussed a lot around this, sanctions being one of them, and how that is the same kind of thing, ties to the larger conversation. But I think the most important part that we'll get into is this overlap of that network state point to what Trump is discussing and how clearly this is going in the same direction. So let's start with a couple of points that I think stand out around the awareness of all of this. And it's just, what people are saying, but really just to continue to make the larger point that I think everybody, I genuinely think most everybody is aware of right now, is that what was promised is not what's happening. And that's, in my opinion, pretty much always how this goes, but it's never been this bombastic in my experience and this identifiable. And so Sony Thang says, Trump says America first, and you thought he meant your bills, your town, your child's future. But America first has never meant the American people, at least as I'm reading this, and I interpret this from the perspective of the Trump administration, or maybe even just the U.S. government at large, which is what I would argue. It has meant the American war machine, the American billionaire, the American shield for Israeli impunity. It means bombs before books, jets before jobs, sanctions before hospitals. He wraps empire in a flag and sells it to you as patriotism. I mean, I very much agree with this from a completely nonpartisan standpoint. You cheer, and that's from, who knows what his political stance is, but I would argue these are objectively true, regardless of what side you think you're on. He wraps empire in a flag and sells it to you as patriotism. You cheer while your schools crumble. You chant while your bridges collapse. You wave the banner that is being used to rob you blind. America first is not a policy. It's a costume. And behind it, there is only a hand signing away your future, to keep someone else's empire alive. Now, this is what every collapsing empire looks like. That's what I really think this is. It doesn't mean it has to go that route, but that we are watching oligarchs, plutocrats, and whatever else you want to call them, enriching themselves as the ship sinks. Or maybe they don't see it that way, but they're sure as hell enriching themselves at your expense. And this is just that example of somebody calling him a pedophile protector and him flipping them off, even though that is quite literally what's going on. Kim.com, a very, very large account. This is, what does he have? 1.6 million followers. By the way, on a quick side note, I thought it was interesting. What's his name? Krasenstein, I forget. Somebody I don't follow, but has, millions of followers. I'm realizing how many of these people follow me, which I just signifies, I think we always talk about, that TLAV as a platform, or all the people we're working with, are, not allowed to see, or have others allowed to see, the reach that is actually there for obvious, objective, nonpartisan reasons. As I always point out, you play the partisan game, that changes, which I refuse to do. But my point is, Kim.com is a huge influencer, reporter, whatever you want to call him. And he was very clearly a major Trump supporter, at least as I interpret it. I mean, maybe you guys disagree. From my memory, he was very much supporting Trump. He was supporting the discussion, the movement, the whole thing, right? Here's what he says today, or on the 20th, rather, yesterday. Imagine you are MAGA. Most election promises broken, which again, people will always try to frame somebody who's criticizing who they like as the other side or whatever. But it's pretty clear that there are people, like myself, who are not taken by partisanship. I will equally criticize anybody from any side that does something I disagree with, or rather that I think is immoral, wrong, unjust, dishonest. And I'll obviously point out when I disagree with something, but as always, counterbalance that with it's up to you, and I could be wrong. But what's important is that they have clearly broken most of these promises. From somebody who has just walked into the room, who doesn't have any side, can look and go, well, yeah, quite clearly, more government, I'm pretty sure, is the opposite of less government. Higher spending, I'm pretty sure, is the opposite of less spending, right? Those are objectively obvious things. It's crazy the way we have to discuss this today. He goes on to say, Department of War taking you to wars. Yeah, so obviously, more wars is not the same as no wars. You cannot trust the plan anymore. I don't know why anybody ever would have trust anything that comes from any government. And that's not because that's the new position. Like that's just common knowledge, guys. There should be basic understanding that governments can be misled themselves. Or even Arca Jr. famously recently said, my father once told me that government lies. It's like, and yet here we are. I'm trusting the government, or some people anyway. You have to pretend everything is fine. Trump makes you look like a fool. No America first, no Epstein files, Israel first. You were conned. 139 views. It's still, I mean, quite frankly, doesn't that just prove that this is kind of content's being suppressed on this platform? I mean, look, my point is always, guys, it's not about the engagement. The views are something different. Engagement's one thing. You can have a post that's wildly unpopular because you say something nobody agrees with, or that your following hates, right? As somebody leaning that direction, that might make sense, right? The views are different. When you glance at this, when you scroll past it in your feed, that counts as a view. So it should generally speaking, if he's got 1 million followers, I make this point every time. It should be hundreds of thousands, just by default, right? Ask Grok, it'll tell you that. I went over this recently back and forth because I was exposing to itself that your numbers that you claim are normal for me are clearly not based on your logic. And it just got all, just funny. I sometimes do that, but it's important to see this, that it's being clearly suppressed, but it is something that people recognize, and it is going around from very high people, or high, reaching influencers, whatever you want to call them. Your favorite guy, somebody who just won a constitutional lawsuit about being, I think he was fired because of something he said about Israel, and he ultimately won. He says, I will never let anyone tell me to vote for the lesser of evil ever effing again. They're the same evil, same owners, same lies with different colors. Leave the duopoly behind. Disenfranchised Americans need to rally behind a new alternative. Now, just as always, this is somebody who's kind of come on the scene. I love what he's been saying, but he kind of came out of nowhere. Somebody, I'm always suspicious. We always should be, rather just cautious, skeptical, right? And I'm saying this for is that this is what I've sensed in the past is the kind of entity that ends up, turning later. Not to say that that's what I think he'll do. I hope he doesn't. I love his work. I'm just simply pointing out when you're asking for a new alternative, I'm worried that's a little, here's the new politician we're going to support, or the next political party that I think will change. And maybe they mean that, good intentions then. Just be skeptical, guys. But again, check out his work. Right? I think he's calling out the right things. But what he's pointing to when saying this, a left-wing account, that's the name of the account here, says, if you're wondering why Trump's ICE is using Israeli spyware, which they are, it's not, as well as Palantir and other overlapping things that amount to the same thing, in my opinion, that was tested on Palestinians to spy on U.S. citizens. If you're wondering why he's spying on U.S. citizens using Israeli spyware, it's because Biden and Harris signed a deal before handing it over to him. And you can read into this. If you're confused right now about the overlap of this, or, that Trump starts one thing, I don't know, Operation Warp Speed, and then Biden continues it, and they try to blame each other, and nothing ever stops. Nobody ever goes to jail. It's a theater show, guys, whether they even know that or not. It's continuing. They're handing the baton, and they continue. I said the same thing after COVID. I said the same thing after pretty much every agenda, and we've been proven correct. The point, and so have a lot of other people, by the way, is that if Biden and Harris signed this agreement and Trump's continuing it, you need to step back and realize whether they all believe what they're saying or not, they're willing to work with the deep state pedophiles is where it interests Israel. Of course, I'm being facetious because this is what they claim every Democrat is, even though there are some truth to some points. It's about the bigger agenda. And what he's frustrated by, maybe just making a point, or maybe he just realizes for the first time, is that they are the same thing, that they're going in the same direction, and he's tired of being played, if that's what his suggestion is. So talking about censorship and overlaps and being double-crossed by the administration claiming to fight for you, as they all do. There's censorship. I could do 4 hours of content just about the many things they've lied about or gone back on, much of which I do in some degree every single show, to some degree. But some of these cases will show you, and I think examples like this stand out, as Elon Musk or JD Vance, as Glenn points out, will make a huge case, which it matters, about this kind of thing happening in Europe, and make it about something, making it specific to some kind of agenda they want you to look at. Only Muslims, or only certain color people, or only certain locations, or only certain religion. It's the way they play this every time, even though it's almost always a more of a broad picture. In this case, you might have seen us discuss this on AM Wake Up. The Miami Beach mayor's office is now flagging citizens' Facebook posts. Now, you as well as I know that's not new. It's been going on for years, left and right. Again, there's your obvious point. This video is insane. We'll play it for you. It's not long. But Glenn makes an additional point. This is exactly the sort of thing that made J.D. Vance go to Europe and condemn their abandonment of free speech values that previously united the U.S. and Europe, or as he framed it. But is this happening in the, I said, oh, it's weird. He didn't write his question. But is this happening in the United States? But this is, I think he meant, this is happening in the United States, the country which elected Vance. We should get at least a similar denunciation, right? But you see, they didn't care about that in Europe. It was about making, one, I think it was about deflection. Look over there and how bad it is, which is somehow supposed to suggest to you subconsciously that we must be better because he's calling them out over there. They're not calling this out. This is for Israel. The post is being flagged because of something that was posted about Israel, or rather specifically about a politician's stance around allowing death to be wrought against the Palestinians by Israel. And that's flagged, and they go to your door and say, did you post this? Watch for yourself. They support that, guys. This is exactly what we called out from the, anybody objective or honest about it, or rather I shouldn't even say it like that, but anybody calling out what the left was doing during COVID or any number of points. All of these people called it out. I don't need to belabor this point. I think most people have come to accept the obvious hypocritical reality of people. I think Alex Zek, I include some comments from him today of people that screamed all the virtuous things they could during COVID, who now completely abandon those principles, beliefs, the moment that it's something supporting their side. It really is disgusting. It's disheartening, but don't forget, at least in my opinion, I don't think most people are falling for this. It's easy to see it that way when this is what these fake platforms are projecting for you to feel, because that helps them accomplish the larger agenda. Now, it's not all encompassing. I shouldn't make it as broad, but I just mean, just take it as a specific example. Let's say Elon Musk and his team want to accomplish something. You could easily fold the conversation, algorithmically lead you certain ways to where it helps you, if not drives you, to make certain conclusions. And then they benefit from that. Yeah, I mean, we must be able to see that in a larger foreign policy way as well. These are global platforms. So here's what's happening. Shouldn't surprise many of you, but it is, I'm still surprised that it's happening to this degree. And what I won't stop it, but what I asked the last time is, what does this cop think? Like, what must you think about what you're doing as a police officer? Like, I mean, do you not, as I wouldn't do it. First of all, I would refuse to do something like this. Like I would like to believe many people would, but that you're, like I said, there's a rapist down the street, so a robbery over there, but you're here hassling this woman about a Facebook post and you pretend free speech exists?
Make sure it's you. We're not sure.
Okay.
Is that your account?
I refuse to answer questions without my lawyer present. So I really don't know how to answer that question either.
Well, like I said, you're not going to jail.
This is freedom of speech. This is America, right?
And
veteran.
And I agree with you 100%.
Okay.
We're just trying to see if it's you, because if we're not talking to the right person, we want to go see who the right person is.
Okay, how can I help you?
So pretty much it's just a statement that was made as far as,
verbatim, it says the guy who consistently calls for the death of all Palestinians tried to shut down a theater for showing a movie that hurt his feelings and refuses to stand up for the LGBTQ community in any way. Even leaves the room when they vote and on related matters. Wants you to know that you're all welcome. Clown face, clown face, clown face. 3 days ago.
So you don't know if it was you?
I'm not going to answer whether that's me or not.
Okay.
The concerning part, and not concerning for the person who's posting it, what we're just trying to prevent is somebody else getting agitated or agreeing with the statement. We're not saying it's true or not.
Understood.
That guy who consistently calls for the death of all Palestinians.
Because he does. Yeah.
That can probably incite somebody to do something radical. That's all we're here to talk about. And we wanted to get your side. If it was you that posted that, I would think to refrain from posting things like that, because that can get something
I appreciate your concern. I appreciate you coming out here.
Okay?
That's it?
That is it.
Okay.
I'm going to maintain my amendment rights to not answer the question about whether or not that's me. I hope that's understandable.
All right.
We appreciate it.
Thank you as well.
Okay.
You as well.
So you make your point, say, I agree with you completely. Free speech and all that, right? We all agree. But then did you post this? Like, what is your point here? Like, really, realistically, if you're on the vine, like he claimed he did, that free speech is okay, you could say whatever you want, but we're worried about other people might act weird, so maybe you should refrain from that. What are you doing right there? If free speech exists and I can say what I want, you're just trying to gently suggest that maybe I shouldn't because bad things could happen? Okay. The idea that we're not aware that people elsewhere might react in their own way that might be violent, why is that even her responsibility? I mean, you guys know all of this. It is about chilling the messenger. They want you to be afraid. They want you to think of this exchange the next time you go and say, hey, that guy supports genocide. I maybe shouldn't say that because maybe somebody else will do something bad. Well, the guy does support genocide. The guy does promote the killing of Palestinians. So what's the point? We shouldn't acknowledge the reality because somebody else might do something crazy. You know what this is about, guys. This is happening in Florida. This is happening all over this country. The Trump administration, the Biden administration, the Bush and Obama administrations, they support all of this, guys. It's important to recognize what that shows you and where we really actually are in this country and have been for a long time, left or right. It's only just coming down right now in the sense of like a step that is being made to, as I've said before, push us into a position where this is no longer necessarily even in their, that they won't worry about this thing anymore. If we're in a position where we can be turned off electronically, and let's be clear for those that might not even know this, these are publicly stated agendas. I'll go over some of this today. The idea of social credit, the idea of have digital IDs, the idea of what Larry Ellison will talk about in regard to everyone's on their best behavior because you're always being watched. These are not jokes. This is what they're telling you. Every one of these people we're talking about are immersed in the network state agenda. We'll go over that too, because they're all reimagining your society. That is the Great Reset from the Republican side. Point is that clearly this is being done to drive us into an insecure position to stop calling out all of these changes. That's how I would read it. Colin Rugg says Miami Beach Police Chief Wayne Jones defends sending detectives to a woman's house over her inflammatory posts. So now you've got a police officer, the captain, the chief, who's online going, I defend doing that. I mean, this is a complete breakdown of the basic understanding of the Constitution, of what their job is. If you're okay with sending a person to another person's house to say you shouldn't do something we know is legally protected, that is within the constitutional rights that you have, but maybe don't do it, then what is it? Aren't these exactly the kind of sentiments that the right was calling out about the left? Those are woke social comment. Yes, it's the same thing. And guess what? On the left side, it was mostly tailored toward Israel too, if you were paying attention. Whether they know that or not, that's where we are. Viral footage shows detectives, I think it just goes over the same post. Torah Jews, a major Orthodox Jewish organization that is anti-Zionist, it often calls these out, and it says this type of behavior is exactly what fuels anti-Semitism. Pretending that criticism of Israel is Jew hatred is a neat yet subtle way to paint Jews as Israeli assets. Literally, this is what they understand. This is a Jewish organization. They're simply highlighting that Zionists will create this kind of subtle yet neat yet subtle, as they frame it, way to paint Jews ubiquitously as Israeli assets from the perspective of what they're discussing. So then people then, you're stopping me from calling this out, is sort of as a way to reaffirm, even though it's incorrect, that is the reality. Sort of like having Israeli entities up there telling you we're going to shut down media that does not say certain things. And then when you go, they just said they control all that media, and you suddenly say Jews control the media, even though they're the ones telling you that they represent all Jews. It's just, you need to understand that this comes from a Zionist manipulation that's designed to get you to focus on the wrong point. And this is what, if you read into a lot of these groups, or rather what they're discussing, they'll tell you that. He says this is behavior is dangerously damaging and against American values. Shame. Follow the account. You'll find out plenty more information. I've played plenty of examples. We're not going to go into that as much today. A couple points that do relate, though, on censorship and the contradiction, hypocrisy of what this administration claims they're doing. Pam Bondi, speaking at the Israeli American Council, because of course, every single moment these people are pandering to the Israeli base everywhere. Pam Bondi proudly tells Israeli American Council how she aggressively persecuted Eden Deckerhoff, the FSU student who allegedly, and I showed you the video, by the way, touched the shoulder of a Jewish person who wore an IDF shirt. Somebody who, in fact, was intentionally trying to create these moments, like we keep showing you, and boldly slanders her by claiming she threw her phone at him. You can read it on her face, and says, now she's kicked out of FSU, and they all cheer about it, right? Glenn says, one of the most pathetic spectacles was when Pam Bondi activated the entire top level of DOJ because some thin female college sophomore at FSU slapped the phone of a big male student wearing an IDF shirt. See how she accidentally, I mean, I don't even think it's accidental. I think she's just this bad at this. Says that she threw her phone at her. No, because you can look at the video and see that he's shoving it in her face and she slaps the phone out of the way, which in a way you could argue was her stopping him from invading her space, which is what they would say if it was in reverse, right? All under this is to say that it was a meaningless event between two students that they turn into some racial motivated action because, because of the way they want to frame it. We don't need to get the video. It was obvious, like tons of other videos, like the one of the girl who was stabbed in the eye with a flagpole, but then magically didn't even have a blemish 2 days later when she was on the show because she lied. And that was easily proven. But this is everywhere, guys. It's nonstop. On top of that, as Mel points out, this is the exact same gathering where the United States Attorney General was just bragging yesterday about how she mobilized this gathering. We'll show you a clip from she's referencing. Mobilized the federal government to go after a college student for yelling and slightly shoving, which I don't even think she shoved him. I think it was about knocking the phone out of her face. Another college student over a t-shirt he was wearing. Now, here's what this discussion is being, either, you know what? I feel like I didn't download it. Yeah, I just want to make these points. You can watch this. This is about a minute and a half. It's Adam Milstein tells the Israel-American Council that, quote, we need to gather intelligence on anti-Semites and then, quote, define who is an enemy we can attack and single out. We need to mobilize, he says, an ecosystem of many organizations to fight against our common enemies. So in his mind, that means you, Joe, out there, if you decide to call it Israel, even if you're an American citizen. And he's talking about using these groups and these institutions and people like Bondi. That's what they're discussing. He was accused by Al Jazeera of funding and doxing of the doxing outfit of the Canary Mission. He co-founded the Israeli-American Council in 2007. Realize, guys, that your government is actively working against you if you don't agree with Israel. American or not, it does not matter. That's not America first by any stretch of the imagination, but that's not necessarily what we're getting into today. But I will include this long thread of many, many things that Trump said before this election and all along his tour, all along his promotion of his campaign. You have to notice that he has Israeli and American flags every single time. It's not a secret, okay? And it's every one of these clips you can clearly find where Trump is telling you, for example, he'll remove the Jew haters from the country. Make the same point every time. Most of the people they're referencing, in my opinion, are people that simply call out the acts of Israel. But even if you just irrationally hate Jewish people, at what point did that become something in this country where the president could deport you for? Doesn't exist, guys. But here he is proudly telling you that if you just simply hate Jews, that you will be moved out of this country. And again, I'm not defending people who irrationally hate anybody. I think they're gross too. The point is you have a right to hate what you want. You can go hate Muslims right now and they're not going to care. In this case, it's obviously about one thing. And that's really Zionism if you understand what I'm going at. But I just want you to understand, regardless of my opinion, the clip here where he tells this radio host that Israel used to control Congress. Rightly so. I've gone over this 100 times. Even with my suppression on this platform, it's barely almost at 1,000. People need to see it, but not when, any number of other people could simply mention this once and it would be the thing they all talk about for 30 days. That's what I always talk about, is that's where I'd like to get, not the manipulative sense, but that's where I'd like to force this platform, the growth that we know is there, into a platform to where regardless of how much they pretend we're not there, that when we do these things, and I feel like we're damn near there right now, it's when we point to something, when we discuss something, it can't be ignored. It's in the conversation, whether I like it or not. That's what we all need to fight for, whether it's TLAV doing that or any other platform that is objective and nonpartisan, because it changes things. And again, I think you are doing that right now. I think we are all doing that to some degree right now. Why do you think they barely, if ever, any of them have even mentioned things like the IMA, despite the people that are involved being major central parts of the larger conversation of the independent media? And all of us are being referenced in one way or another by all of these people, with James Corbett, Whitney Webb, Derek, myself. I mean, it's pretty crazy, isn't it? It's because they don't want average people to recognize that it's there. I'm convinced of that. Let me just quickly delete one of these trolls posting on Telegram because they love to do it while I'm on the show. It's just funny anyway. By the way, if you are on a Telegram chat, you'll notice it. It's hilarious. And I'll call them out on the chat and then I'll get like 17 of them in a row. It's like, support Trump's Telegram. It just shows you we're over the mark, guys. I love it. I applaud them every time. Thank you for letting us know that we're talking about the right things. So continuing, here's Pam Bondi, not going to play it again, but the obvious hypocritical moment where she came out and said hate speech is... what was that? Wait, how'd she frame it again? Help me listen to it.
Free speech. and then there's hate speech.
Right.
And
there's free speech and there's hate speech, and they're not the same thing. Yeah, they are, though. And that's insane that this did not bring down the entire conversation. She's still supported by all these fake patriots, and she came out and told you that the same thing that you called out about the Democrats, that's pretty damn embarrassing. Every one of these moments shook people free from their lies. It's happening everywhere right now. But they are censoring for Israel. It shouldn't be that hard to see. It's all very easy to prove. Now, Sal the Agorist on Twitter is showing you what we already know as well, but it's important to see it because he's literally asking Grok, and Grok is telling him based on, whatever this new thing is they're doing. As usual, like last time, I'm sure Elon's right now hurrying to try to hide that somehow, updating Grok, and suddenly you can't do this anymore. But they simply ask this semantic contextual scoring V3 object for this account, and as he already knew, his account is being deboosted by 65 to 78%. Sal the Agorist, who, by the way, has 275,000 followers, right? And you could ask it, it'll break it down for you like we saw the last time. Actually, let me see if this even comes up. Maybe this is it right here. Oh, no, that's the APAC one. It was APAC tracker. Oh, here we go. Right here. This is the one. Check out how many censorship flags Twitter has on TLAV. APAC tracker just exposed this all the way back in 2024. And it literally broke down. This is what I'm talking about. This was a moment where somebody discovered you could ask Grok and it would break down all these different tags they applied to your account. And then weirdly, when they updated Grok, suddenly you weren't able to do this anymore. And it just shows you they're suppressing our content like a lot of people. And we're probably not even the highest on the list, guys. There's probably tons of people out there with larger accounts like Sal the Agorist who are saying things they don't like. Criticizing Israel, suppressing, stating Zionists are involved with the uprising in Iran, which is a fact. Claiming that intel community is behind the Epstein files. They don't like all these things. All you patriots out there that believe you're truly that, and maybe you actually are, need to start recognizing that the team calling themselves that at the any side are not actually doing that. Just about being honest. And I know you're out there, and I know you're starting to call it out. I'll include this for you too. This is back from 2024. So Glenn Beck, by the way, who's changed his flag to the flag of the Shah, apparently, because he's totally a nonpartisan, objective journalist, right? What an effing joke. It's just, I'm so blown away by these ridiculous people today. First of all, because anybody with a brain cell can recognize what Operation Ajax was, and that it's based on an illegal action, and that it was not better for anybody other than their oligarch friends, like everything else they're doing today. But these are the new media, I guess he's not even in that group, but fighting the deep state as they're literally helping them roll out everything they claim they're fighting. Anyway, he goes, I said I would give Pam Bondi a year. I told you this was coming. And he says, who helped dismantle the deep state, let Americans see the truth. Well, a year is up, and I haven't seen the evidence of any of that. So it's Bondi's fault. Good job, Glenn. Way to help keep Trump going with all of his lies and BS. Let's blame it on one of the people who blindly follows his orders. Right, Glenn? Because that's what smart people would do. Can an update on what he writes? Can we get an update on any George Soros investigations? You mean aside from working with a George Soros lackey that he brought in the Treasury Department? You mean like on the side of that, Glenn Beck? These guys are ridiculous, guys. They're just out to try to get you to focus on one small fraction of the big picture. And even that is not even what they do. It's embarrassing. Jeff Carlson writes, everyone likes to pretend that Pam Bondi is somehow separate from Trump, that she's out there operating on her own. Total nonsense. She's doing exactly what Trump wants her to do. Now, look, whether you disagree with that last sentiment, why in the world, even if she's out there independently doing what she wants to do, would that not still reflect on Trump? It's worthy of ridicule. That's a really silly thing to put out there. That suddenly that he needs to get rid of her because she's not. Okay, then what about Noam and everybody else doing exactly the same things? What about Cash? Well, these people also in some ways call him out. Like I told you, Bondi and Cash are likely to be the first two blamed for doing what they were told, blamed for what Trump was trying to do and they wouldn't let him, whatever it becomes. They're secretly deep state asset until they later get mad because they were thrown at the bus and then call it all out. I'm waiting for Bongino to start slipping. It's pretty alarming and obvious. On top of that, Elon Musk says anyone who pretends fraud prevents fraud investigations is on the fraud. And of course, he points to people involved in fraud. In 2 previous elections, Spangenberger was about to lose mysteriously if last drive was statistically implausible numbers of Dem votes appeared and somehow got counted. Good. Call him out. Arrest him. Go for it, Elon. Let's get something actually going. How about you show the evidence and then actually arrest them? I'm all for that because you know what? It wouldn't surprise me if they broke the law in 1,000 different ways. But what I find infuriatingly stupid is that you continue to point to these things and then don't care that nothing happens. How many times can you call fraud or crime or treason against everybody you guys pretend you're fighting before and then nothing happening before people wake up? Well, apparently right now, because people are waking up. This is tiresome. It's continually the same thing. And he writes, anyone who prevents fraud is in on the fraud. Well, as Mika writes, what about someone who keeps pardoning fraudsters? Now, it is always framed as a partisan point, but you can clearly prove these people broke the law. And they're not, I mean, like one of the people he just pardoned was somebody he pardoned before, and they broke the law again, and he pardoned him again. You can go through it all for yourself. These people are not good people. Most of them are just people that are donating to their campaigns in some way on their side. And I'm not even suggesting it's unique to Trump. It's not. But realize that this is a joke. They're all doing the same things. None of them are on your side. And it's just pathetic that they continue to go, look, they're cheating over there in the elections. Great, then actually arrest somebody. I'm not suggesting Elon Musk has that authority, but you know as well as I, he could simply make that happen in a lot of ways by talking to the right people. But how about Cash? How about Bondi or Noam or anybody? How about any level of authority to go after any of the people you continue to claim are actually doing something? Russian collusion, January 6th, Mar-a-Lago raid, AutoPen. Trump keeps talking about it, then do something. Now, I've told you the reality of that, even though he's making playing you in the reality of that without evidence, I still would be fascinated to see them actually do something. He's at least telling his people he did this and he did that. Okay, then do something about it. I mean, that just has to be the end all point at this point, guys. They're not actually following through. 2020 election. Pelosi's a traitor. Great, arrest her. I'll cheer it on. Epstein pedophile list. Yeah, that one's real uncomfortable because nobody wants to acknowledge that they're simply not complying with the obvious point that everyone said they were going to do. 1% of the documents, COVID. You obviously know why that's not going to happen if you have any sense. It's because Trump was a huge part of that and still is. Benghazi, Doge findings. Well, we'll actually point to that right now, which I find interesting. Ukraine impeachment hoax. I mean, guys, you could make a list that is 30 times longer than this. They're not doing anything. Now, this is interesting to me. The way I read this, we're going to get into Doge employees being investigated, which could end up being nothing. Investigation with no outcome is nothing. They actually waste taxpayer money to put on a show to make you think something's happening. Like James Comey, Letitia James, even Bolton, or any number of other examples where they didn't do anything. They presented a case that was told you, and they did, and then they act like it's somebody else's fault. So here, you've got investigations beginning, so that right there could just be the way to get you distracted, into Doge employees claiming that they did something. And again, this is what's interesting about this. Here's how Barnes frames it. Bondi's DOJ, her fault, right? Like she's not just following orders, going after Doge employees, who then he frames as who were reporting proof of potential election fraud. Well, as a lawyer, I find it strange that you would say proof of potential fraud. That would be evidence of potential fraud. Proof means it's proof. That means it is fraud. Find that interesting, by the way. But either way, the point is that you're saying that they did, they were exposing something. Well, I don't see that to be the case right now. And there's different framing from different sides. So the real way, aside from the personal framing, the Trump administration is actually investigating Doge employees. Now that seems interesting, doesn't it? Because isn't that the same team? Well, I would argue that if this is even just the investigation that goes nowhere, it's about making you think that they're going after people like that. Distraction, discussion, because I found this interesting. I took time to talk about it. Kyle Cheney says the Social Security Administration, I'll show you the article, has referred to, this is Trump's administration, to Doge employees for Hatch Act violations after discovering contacts with a political group seeking Social Security Administration data to overturn election results. That's fascinating. Now, it also could be that these people are being blamed alone to avoid any other accountability, because this clearly is something we've seen from this administration. Or really just from the government, by the way, going back a long way. I've been telling you this my entire career, how they all cheat. They all try to commit election fraud. They do it every single time on both sides. And it's a game of getting away with what you can. They all do it. I've proven this 100 times over, whether it's election machines. It's just obvious, guys. It's not even that hard to prove. So in this case, if this is coming out and it's something that's somehow being done But, maybe there's a lone person in the administration that goes, we have to call this out and force it into the media. And now they can't put it away. This would be a way to make it seem like it's their fault and not ours, and we weren't trying to overturn election results, even if you genuinely think that the outcome was stolen. Which, again, you can show clear evidence that in regard to Trump, very much so, that there was manipulation. But if you recognize it's on both sides, it kind of changes the story. But no one should deny that there was clear election manipulation during Trump's, every one of his elections, but so too with all the rest I can point out. And I'm not trying to make that like overly broad. It just is clear. You can go back to my buddy Pasta, right? Craig. He's interviewed and I think is interviewing again Clint Curtis, who I've played that clip many times where he's, I think it was, I actually forget what state it was, but it was a state court, and he was testifying that he was paid to manipulate these voting machines. And I say this every single time. He made this entire case. He laid out all the evidence. He had all of it. He proved it. Actual proof. And then they went back and used the same machines. The government, in every possible way, used them to this very day. I just don't know how you make sense of that, right? It's a game they're all playing. But in this case, going after these specific individuals. So again, he frames it as who were reporting proof of potential election fraud. Here is Adam Cochran saying, well, first, Molly Jong Fast, highlighting the same tweet from Kyle, says 2 members of Elon Musk's Doge team working at the Social Security Administration were secretly in touch with an advocacy group seeking to, quote, overturn election results in certain states, according to Politico anyway. And one signed an agreement that may have involved using Social Security data to match state voter rolls. The Justice Department revealed in a newly disclosed court papers. Now, even just, let's say that's exactly what happened. Clearly, this is something you could even say with good intention, that the argument is because we're trying to prove that there was fraud, right? One, they weren't supposed to be doing this. They're violating many different things by getting into this personal information, but secondarily, they lied about it the entire time. They said this is what they were just trying to remove fraud, and rather specifically, lessen government spending and detect fraud, but not in the sense of voting fraud, like in regard to financial fraud. But if ultimately they're able to prove fraud, I don't think anybody would care. But it's about what really happened behind the scenes in regard to Doge entirely. This was not about fraud. This was not about anything other than, I think, condensing power, collecting information for the AI transition, and they just dropped it and moved on. They didn't cut costs. In fact, they lied about most of it, and this has come out every which way. Many people in the partisan conversation have still yet to acknowledge that, but it's easily proven. And responding to Molly, Adam says, okay, so the conspiracies about Doge illegally accessing data and working with groups to overturn election results are accurate. No, that's just, you could argue that it's a little more nuanced than that's what they were deliberately doing. But I agree. I think this is what makes the most sense. This is now 3 different schemes we had proof of where Trump and co. tried to deprive you of the right to vote. That's the way he frames it. You could argue just as easily that he believed he was stolen from and was trying to prove that. That would change his intention. That's why I don't think it's important to speak, or rather accurate, or rather in our interest to speak to intention, because it's very difficult to actually engage with the facts. And the facts are that they did this. Trump's own administration is now admitting, at least, that they have evidence suggesting that they did something they claim they did not, which shouldn't surprise anybody. This is the article from Politico. Trump administration concedes Doge team may have misused Social Security data. 2 members of Elon's Doge team working at the Social Security Administration were secretly in touch with an advocacy group seeking to overturn election results in certain states. And one signed an agreement that may have involved using the data to match state voter rolls, according to Trump's Justice Department. Elizabeth Shapiro, a top Justice Department official, said the SSA referred both Doge employees for potential violations of the Hatch Act, which, by the way, even if they were charged, Trump would probably pardon them anyway, which bars government employees from using their official positions for political purposes, which, come on, really? We should all kind of laugh out loud about that, which my point is that they all do it. Not that we should accept that it's okay. My point is just that it's important to recognize that it's not some unprecedented thing, and likely aren't going to hold each other accountable when they all do that. Shapiro's previously unreported disclosure dated Friday came as part of a list of corrections. This is interesting. It's a quote that's from the actual report, a list of corrections to testimony by top SSA officials during last year's legal battles over Doge's access to this data. So corrections, meaning they lied in court, if we're going to be real about that. Oops, here's a correction to what we meant, or we just didn't say the correct thing. They revealed that Doge team members shared data on unapproved third-party servers and may have accessed private information that had been ruled off limits. Now, easily, the action itself is very suspect. But you could argue that they just, accidentally, the access was given, but they never did anything wrong. That may even be the case. What I'm more concerned about, as I've talked about quite a bit, is who else might have had access or what else might be going on. And I'm only using this as the reference point. It's not just about Israel in this case, but any other interest, lobbying, Palantir, whatever you may want to think about, even the AI overlap and lots of big moneyed interests. This was simply the article, the conversation that I still think is wildly relevant from 2025, that the Trump administration's missing ethics pledges. Everyone just brushed this off like it didn't matter. But the reality was that many of them did not even sign the basic documents about conflicts of interest and ethics, which means not like they could just lie about it, but they're not even legally accountable right now for these very why do you think they all are just like publicly okay with these conflicts of interest? So the point is that knowing that the situation is set up the way it is, that when we're talking about the third-party servers, well, what does that mean? Who is that involved? Well, I bet you we never even get to find out who that is and what third party is in control or has access to this database of information, or rather whatever they were dumping in any number of overlaps. So let's be clear about the AI part. It was what was it? Get out of there. There we go. Oh, that's why. Spelling it wrong. There it was. Oh, look at that. You see how that keeps happening? It wouldn't go. Anyway, this is the wrong one, I think. It's about the artificial intelligence memorandum of understanding between the U.S. government and Israel. This is just the Palantir one. The point is that you have access to Israel as a government has access to all of the information that they remove silos for to train AI, whatever else they claim they were doing in the U.S. government. So that's just one point. But maybe these are lobbyists that are actually. The point being that as they're doing this, it may have been they were the middleman of giving access to something else, which is what this appears to be to me. Now, it says Shapiro has also revealed that Steve Davis, a senior advisor to Musk and Doge's team, was copied on March 3rd, 2025 email that included a password-protected file containing private information about 1,000 people contained in Social Security systems. However, it's unclear, she said, whether Davis ever accessed the file. And Shapiro said current SSA employees have been unable to access the file to determine precisely what's going to contain. So what is that? Specific file, password-protected for 1,000 people? That feels very targeted to me. What else have they been looking at, guys? What other groups have they been targeting? I'm not going to say I know for sure, but clearly they're targeting people speaking about Israel. They're targeting left Democrats that they think are acting a certain way. I mean, or just people calling them out. So it's very interesting. It's pretty clear to me that something was going on here. It doesn't seem to be much interest to try to find this out. So we have Trump's administration floating this out to say, look, there was kind of an issue. I'm willing to bet you that this really goes nowhere, but it's about simply signaling that there is some kind of an effort to make sure we're being accountable. Or maybe it's a signal to people, because you have to realize who he's working with on the global stage. Every one of the left Democrats that you guys all said were the people he was fighting or showing up as inauguration. It's clear that there's a larger overlap, or really that they're all on the same side, in my opinion. So this may just be a signal to say, hey, certain things are going different ways now because of that. It's all just hypothetical, guys. The reality is, again, not to miss the forest for the trees, this was a lie, guys. They lied to you about what they were doing. And these are these young people working for Elon Musk. Who knows what else they were doing if this is what we're able to see? Maybe that's the point, to bury the larger picture. Also, among the corrections, DOJ revealed that a Doge team member was briefly granted access to private Social Security profiles, even when a court prohibited that. These are things that matter because it's easy to prove right there was a violation that took place. But we tend to kind of look for the larger story, which we should. But we got to stop leaving these things up in the air. That's something somebody should be held accountable for, and I bet you it never happens. Shapiro said the access was never utilized, and in another instance, Doge team members had access for 2 months to a call center profile that contained private information. Shapiro also revealed that despite minor assertions in court, the Social Security Administration's Doge team members were using links to share data through the third-party server Cloudflare. I mean, come on, guys. Now we're talking about another company involved that then would have access regardless of what they say, especially when you recognize the other, just connections through Cloudflare. many of which we could obviously point out. It's the same conversation, guys. Cloudflare, it says, is not approved for storing SSA data, and when used in this manner is outside their security protocols, said Shapiro. SSA did not know until its recent review that DOJ's team members were using Cloudflare during this period. Well, it rings similar to Walls using the telemessage app and archiving their signal discussions from the White House back to an Israel intelligence archive app, which is what that was. That's insane, guys, and it never gets any conversation. So in this case, we're talking about this overlapping third-party servers. They didn't know that this was even happening, that they were even using it because Cloudflare is a third-party entity. The Social Security Administration has not been able to determine exactly what data was even shared to Cloudflare. How is that even possible? So that means they don't have access. They can't ask the company. This is the government's information, or rather the government-controlled information, and these were government entities that accessed this through Cloudflare. So the only way that would make sense is if they are not letting them access that. Isn't this a national security interest? I mean, this is just insane. I think my point is this is about something other than what they're presenting. And then, or whether that data even still exists there. This is just criminal stuff, guys. That's what this is. It's very, very criminal. And what I'm trying to say is that what they're pointing to is just, it's sort of like the tip of the iceberg, if you will, the analogy. Like, who knows what's even really down there? This is just an example that something's going on. I doubt we ever get to find out. Now, Jason Bassler made this great image post, 365 days of lies, gaslighting, and authoritarian fear porn. And then he makes this image where he goes through all these major moments that were clear and jarring for anybody honest, and simply makes the statement through each one of them. You can look at them for yourself, Stargate, and all the things we've called out, Real ID. Imagine living through the past 365 days and still not being even a little bit suspicious. Everything. Now, Epstein files. What about that? The reality of how clear this is, and so many people still pretend it's not there. The Epstein files are 31 days overdue under the statutory deadline mandated by Congress. Less than 1% of all the files have been released by the Department of Justice. And Mackie Allen also points out that Massey says that the FBI is protecting these 20 individuals, and it's a video you can watch for yourself. We've discussed this already. Just to recognize that that's just kind of drifting in the background. From more than anything, the people who were the ones telling you this was everything are now the ones trying to hide from it. And I'm not talking about the majority. I'm talking about the loudest screamers like a Bongino. I think actually he's now somewhat trying to point to it, I guess, but the reality is he's the one that was in there covering it up. So it's kind of embarrassing. We'll keep following this up. I mean, it's important. On top of that, New York Times put out an article, and no, I'm not telling you to trust the New York Times. I don't know why you would think that. The point is that this information is in here, and you can read it for yourself. Any objective, honest person would engage to find out what it is, check the source material, decide for yourself, whether New York Times or CNN or Fox News. At the end of the day, it's information they're presenting. And if you care to look, you'll find out that there is information here that is easily verifiable, and it's no different than Obama or Bush or anybody else, in my opinion. They're profiteering and enriching themselves as they use you. 1 year ago, President Trump took an oath to serve the American people. Instead, as the New York Times writes, he used the presidency to enrich himself. The New York Times editorial board writes, this is how Trump has pocketed at least $1.4 billion. And your government's increasing. Spending is up in most tangible ways. And you've been lied to about most everything. Well, this is the same old thing we've been calling out my entire career doing this. About every one of them before it, and it's always the same story. I always have hope that it will be different. I always have hope that maybe what you see in this person may just be the right one, but not every time. Every time. Whether it's crypto scams that are clearly manipulative, whether it's them using the presidency to enrich themselves in 100 other ways, whether it's Trump literally putting money stolen from Venezuelan oil into secret accounts that you can't access, it's obvious. It's just about being real about it, guys. Now, on that note, Massey recently said yesterday, selling stolen oil. By the way, I believe the seventh tanker has been taken by the United States of Venezuelan tankers, just stealing the oil. And it's like, so even if you believe that they're criminals and it also, why wouldn't that then be what the Venezuelan people get to use? Right? Why wouldn't that be then given back to the current government that they can then decide what to do with? Nope, because the U.S. government is making all the decisions because it's totally democracy, guys. Selling stolen oil and putting billions of dollars in a bank in Qatar, the very same Qatar that his own team is saying, Israel right now is telling you Qatar's the big issue. Loomers of the world, how stupid they are telling you that Qatar is always a secret spy in Trump's administration from Qatar. Maybe, Ask yourself the question, but don't let that ignore how obvious it is that that's a deflection from the real problem that's everywhere you look. But it's funny how you can make those arguments and they will not really care that they're still working right alongside them, or that Israel facilitates most of what they do through Qatar in regard to Hamas. But anyway, it says billions of dollars in the bank in Qatar to be spent without congressional approval is not constitutional. But that doesn't seem to matter today. It's not. Neither is illegally arresting U.S. citizens or not presenting warrants or, all the different things that are happening right now. But you're so blatantly enriching yourself with this. Only Congress can appropriate money. He doesn't care. The president can't legally create a second treasury overseas for his own piggy bank. Wake up, Congress. Well, guess what? If you think about that, creating a second treasury overseas, what does that sound like? Doesn't that kind of sound like a separate governmental organization, like a shadow government, like a deep state? Ooh, oh no. Well, these are just terms, guys. At the end of the day, if you're thinking about the fact that we've talked, what is the term? The continuity of government, and the Reagan discussion, and which essentially set up a shadow government that never really went away. We've gone over this very clearly. Or just the idea of a network state transition or some kind of new change. The idea being that they seem to be setting up some kind of different functional entity here. Then maybe that's not the case. I just think that these points continue to collect in very obvious ways. Massey's calling it out very strongly. Here's what he had to say about this.
Real quick, any update on the Epstein files?
Yeah, we responded to Judge Engelmeyer today with a letter, and that should be on the docket for you to see.
Okay, and your tweets obviously went super viral over the weekend about Greenland and so on. But did you hear from the White House at all about, or have you heard from the White House at all generally?
Well, first of all, what they're doing is not constitutional. They're trying to gaslight folks. They're saying, oh, this is Venezuela's money. Even though they've stolen the oil and they're selling it, they say they're caretaking Venezuela's money, so this isn't money that belongs in the U.S. Treasury, and it's not money that Congress can appropriate. But the reality is the president, when he speaks as if he's going to spend this money any way he pleases, and that would be a violation of the Constitution and our power to appropriate all money from the Treasury.
What do you make of him banking that money in Qatar as opposed to in the United States? Like, are American banks not good enough? Like, what's going on there?
Well, I think that was him hedging his bets. I think they were concerned that the courts would seize the money and that they would find what he's doing unconstitutional. And so the money that's here in the States, they may be caretaking for Venezuela, but I think if they try to spend money extra constitutionally outside of the constitutional appropriations clause, they'll use that pot of money they're keeping in Qatar.
Got it. Thank you so much, Congressman. I appreciate it.
See how clear that is? Right? So he's setting this up so when he wants to do something that might possibly get pushback, well, he'll just use the slush fund, the deep state fund, the shadow government fund that we're building for the new transition, or whatever you want to look at it as. It's clear that that's what Massey was just describing. So this is just an image beneath the post that somebody shared of that post. And I just think it's interesting, as always. The voting record, I think it was even higher than 82%, by the way. I think it was 90 something when you look at the overall breakdown. But either way, that votes 82% according to the graphic. I think it's more with Republicans. And I'm talking like the GOP. Oh, it's right here. The average House Republican votes 93.2 and is not voting 4%. I thought he was up there. But either way, the point is that they're calling him the rhino, or like Loomer getting really embarrassed and getting ratioed everywhere about calling him actually just a Democrat by, it's just crazy. Now, it doesn't mean you have to support him. You can still hate him. You can still think he's fighting the team. But at the end of the day, it's pretty crazy. This is the post right here, that this is somebody who you can clearly recognize is in line with what the general consensus of what Republicans, the Republican Party, the Republican in general would normally do. And then you can look at what the Trump team is doing. And it's completely the opposite, but they're the ones that are America first. It's just a sad deception that's really not holding water right now, guys. It's just not happening anymore. Now, some points on Iran that are important to see that I just didn't want you to miss. Then we're going to get into for the rest of the show, the larger point for today. I've been making this point for a long time, and it's something that is easily proven, as most of the things we discuss, if you just take the time to go back and look at, for example, what previous U.S. administrations have said, or Henry Kissinger has a few that are really clear. It's that they use U.S. sanctions to punish the peoples of foreign countries, to force them to respond against their own governments. It's wildly illegal. Even the sense of unilateral sanctions in and of themselves, guys, it's not supposed to be where individual countries can unilaterally sanction other countries. That's supposed to be illegal. That's international, that's economic terrorism. It's what it really is. It's supposed to go through some international body. Now, people can, at the end of the day, it's not about trying to say what is and shouldn't, at the end of the day, from a global perspective, the U.S. could take actions for itself without U.S. or rather international engagement. But if you're talking about some kind of, why in the world would the U.S. government have the right to manipulate Iran, for example, or anybody, because they make a deal with a country that they don't want? The only reason that's possible is because of the petrodollar, because of the U.S. currency reserve, because they have that power over everybody else, which is what people are trying to change. They then call that something bad in and of itself, but it's interesting. So my point is that Bessent here is very clearly acknowledging, and I think kind of by accident, that what they do is use these things to force countries into desperation. That's terrorism, guys. And why would that even be something we support? Because we argue it's the best interest of us, so we're able to manipulate and hurt innocent people because it helps their bottom dollar? Yeah, that's what they're literally talking about. As Ryan Grimm writes, here is Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent admitting that the goal of U.S. sanctions is to make ordinary Iranians so miserable that they rise up and overthrow the government. This is the kind of thing everybody knows, but is rarely admitted openly. It's the same thing they're doing to Palestinians right now, but failing because at some point people just decide they're not going to back down. That we've been murdered and lied to and raped and tortured, and at this point we are willing to die to defend what we believe in. That's where they're at. That's, I think, largely where a lot of these countries have gotten to, Iranians included to some degree. But here's what he said.
What do you want to say about sanctions, something else you've been working on, of course? What are you planning there in terms of Iran and the impact there? Do sanctions actually work? And the same question with regard to 500% secondary sanctions or tariffs on countries who purchase energy products from Russia.
Okay, so two things there.
You see the point, right? Russia. So just randomly because people want to buy anything from Russia you don't like, suddenly we're going to sanction them? That's not tariffs, you understand? That's sanctions. It's just, these people are a joke. This is a big, laughable, ridiculous thing. That's just this lumbering idiot entity that is just doing, I'm only saying it like this because you're talking about actions that are on the surface of the conversation, unjust, illegal, crimes, literally. They just don't care, I guess. This is why I keep trying to show you that at least I think there's an effort to do a lot of this for the agenda of actually collapsing, whether literally or just economically or even just like in a reputation sense, this country. Collapse it, to break down what we are. That's why I keep showing you Stephen Miller out there promoting the worst sentiments, the things that are actually dividing this country, the things that are actually hurting, the things that contradict our core values. Think about that when he says it again.
To 500% secondary sanctions or tariffs on countries who purchase energy products from Russia.
Okay, so two things there. There are Treasury sanctions. And if you look at a speech that I gave at the Economic Club of New York last March, I said that I believe the Iranian currency was on the verge of collapse, that if I were an Iranian citizen, I would take my money out. President Trump ordered Treasury and our OFAC division, Office of Foreign Asset Control, to put maximum pressure on Iran, and it's worked. Because in December, their economy collapsed. We saw a major bank go under. The central bank has started to print money. There is a dollar shortage. They are not able to get imports. And this is why the people took to the street. So this is economic statecraft. No shots fired. And things are moving in a very positive way here.
Wow. So I kind of get the sense that at the end there, if this wasn't necessarily, if it was off the cuff, that it was kind of like, oh, wait a minute, I don't think I was really supposed to say that. Maybe. Or you could consider, as the asset that he clearly is for a larger conversation, that this is what I would see Israel saying about this to kind of gloat about how they drove this into reality. Well, then typically in the past, the U.S. administration would get up and say, we're fighting for the people and we're trying to fight against the government's hurting them. We're standing with Iranians. He literally just explicitly stated that what they did, attacking their currency with sanctions, is why it collapsed. And that's why people were in the streets, meaning that they're angry about what you did to their country. But he's meaning more so that they're, protesting the Iranian government because of what we created. Now, there is some level of it. We've gone over this with Robert's his well put together articles, as I'll even play a clip I think I have in here. Maybe I didn't include it, but we will in the larger foreign policy conversation, likely tomorrow. Doing a show tomorrow, but it might not be that day, depending on what happens that we get into it. But the reality being that clearly this is, it was an organic protest in Iran. People were protesting things that they disagreed with. Now, it was clear that they were very aware that this was being caused by the U.S. government, but they were in fact protesting responses of the Iranian government to that they were unhappy with the way they were handling it. And then we're clearly discussing, and there's all sorts of evidence around this, that they didn't want anybody else involved, kind of a thing. I can't speak to every individual, but you can see these sentiments for a very long time. And then to make that case, once you started seeing the massed people that were clearly foreign actors in there doing things against Iranians and claiming they were the Iranians, then the unions and pretty much everybody else came out and counter-protested that. The unions that were supporting the protest to begin with came out and said, that's not the protest. These are foreign actors. We no longer support it. I mean, it's just the same clumsy effort you see from Israel and the U.S. every time they do this. It's because the Iranian people are very, very aware, because of the media coverage, because of their living through it, that this is not in their interest and that it's always the same kind of groups driving it. So he's admitting that we did this to hurt them, to drive them to revolt. Statecraft, he calls it. You could argue that that's somehow better because not a shot was fired, but it's also illegal, guys. It's a crime. There's not a just reason. So would it, if you went into invade Iran because you wanted to benefit from it, that would also be a crime. The idea of warfare is not supposed to be for your benefit, but that's how Miller and Trump and the rest are starting to frame it. Well, Denmark can't defend Greenland, so we should take it. That's the law. This is a transition, both psychologically in every way. They're trying to transition everything we are into what benefits them, guys. You have to understand that. Now, this is not new. We've talked about this before. Rudy Giuliani celebrates the starvation of Iranian civilians at a rally. Caitlin Johnstone wrote this article in 2018. Here's the clip. And it's the same thing. And I've made the same point then. It's the same thing he's discussing, that the U.S. sanctions and what they were involved with created a circumstance where Iranians were so desperate, they were selling their organs for food. And he says, this is how you create a great revolution.
So now tell me that you're not a serious threat. If the regime we're trying to overthrow sees us as a threat, you are a threat. It is a reality. The protests are getting worse. I don't know when we're going to overthrow them. It could be in a few days, months, a couple of years, but it's going to happen. They are going to be overthrown. The people of Iran obviously have now had enough. The sanctions are working. The currency is going to nothing. They're where Russia was. They're where Poland was. We see signs of young men and women saying, give me some food. We saw a sign of a man trying to sell his internal organs for $500 American, probably a fortune in Iran today. This is truly pitiful. These are the kinds of conditions that lead to successful revolution.
I still just can't believe that it was so blatantly stated. But again, he didn't, I don't think, recognize or just thought this would end up getting as much reach. This is a private meeting to the MEK. That's who he was speaking to. A designated terrorist organization, if I remember correctly, until Clinton took them off the list. Left and right, guys, always the same game. But think about that. And that's what Bessent is saying right there. Soros, Bessent, same thing, guys. The reality being that this is what we drove them to do, but then publicly blaming Iran for why it's happening. That's, again, like, that's the stop hitting yourself kind of moment, that you're literally doing this to stop doing it to yourself, Iran. It's just, but yet still and it comes down to it, arguing that this is them and their responsibility and their economic collapse. We'll shut down your power and say, this is what happened. I'm not saying that's what happens every time. There are clear examples where Iran does this to stop their cyber manipulations and whatever else, or to control their own people. My opinion about government in general. It's not about good and bad here. It's about acknowledging the facts and what we can actually prove. I just think this is too important to miss. Now, in this conversation on January 13th, 2025, the title being The Fake Globalist Resistance Ushering in the Globalist Plan, like Jones and all the rest, is that we discussed the MEK in a good portion in this video or in this episode, if you want to check it out for yourself. Now, here is Max Blumenthal highlighting what the Shah's son, as Robert jokingly called the crown prince of democracy. That's how dumb they think we are, guys, that you can have a crown prince that's going to be democracy, right? Or the son of the dictator that is just by default the one that's going to be leading our democracy because he's the son of the previous leader? Is that how democracy works? Remind me. Reza Pahlavi promised his followers they were fighting the final battle as they ride across Iran, right? And he kept lying, saying, we're in the capital and he's fled the capital. They were all lies. You can easily prove that today. All the same Israeli liars out there, all the same team sport politics Republicans were all pushing the same story. Mario Knopfel just kept getting exposed by Twitter for sharing fake information. Jones and Benny Johnson, all the same people, like clockwork, shared all the same lies. And yet still have grown in reach on these platforms. It's incredible, isn't it? But here, after he drove all that and lied about it all, well, now that the mayhem is, he says, over, it's not over, it's diminished. This is the 20th, 21st. You could still see examples of what they're trying to do. But now that it's less than it was, he's calling on the U.S. and Israel to bomb the country that he fled with millions of stolen riches. A display of desperation. But think about this. We're trying to save these people, right? Fight for these people, now go bomb those people. Typical.
Says there has to be a change of direction. And that's exactly what the Iranian people are asking
But
for.
if the Iranian people now had the support of the president on that idea, will that encourage them to take to the streets in even greater numbers and put more pressure on the regime from within?
Yes, and I think that the decisive factor would be the instrument of repression that has been unleashed against our people is what is the ultimate obstacle to overcome. What changes the odds in favor of the people that can finally take over the system and push to a complete collapse depends on calculated strategic strikes against these institutions.
Okay. And remind me again that what you want is the complete collapse of Iran? Apparently that's what you're fighting for? The complete collapse of Iran, and how we achieve that is bombing the country? Remind me, are Iranians going complete collapse of our country? Aren't they protesting against the fact that the economy I mean, it's just pathetic what we're watching, guys. And this is what's so crazy. It's very easy to prove that they have zero popular support in the country. But yet here's Fox News, even CNN, yet again showing you that they're really on the same side when it comes to the reality of what's going on, pushing you to believe that this man is fighting for freedom in Iran. It's the same story over and over.
American strikes?
It would be, well, it could be an American strike, it could be Israeli strike, it could be whatever. The Iranian people now are looking as the cavalry coming, because we can only hold the fort up to a point.
Right, because he's already, by the way, actually said that you'll be welcomed as liberators. We've heard that before, haven't we?
Yep. The cavalry can help us overcome the odds. Look, this is a regime so desperate that it has to import elements from Lebanon, from Afghanistan, from Iraq as instrument of repression, because they are running out of elements of their own doing the dirty job against them.
I think it's partly broken English, but so all he was lazily doing right there is, Hezbollah or ISIS-K in Afghanistan, whatever group that they're completely puppeteering to go, they're the ones, and they're importing them. But guess what? He doesn't have any evidence whatsoever of that. You know what we have evidence of these very people working with ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, in pretty much every single location. Somalia, by the way, which we'll go into tomorrow in a much deeper discussion about the reality of Al-Shabaab and the reality of what has been done to that country, even going back to the Soviet Union, but post the Soviet Union, to the United States government and even Israel in the more current conversation. But largely the U.S. government literally creating the problem that they point to today. Like almost every other point you can make. And it's not debatable, guys. It just kills me. But these people are constantly pushing the same story over and over. And it's like they don't even need the momentum anymore. Like what we're seeing with this administration. Just yell the narrative. No one supports it. We'll just kidnap Maduro anyway. No one's going to stand up and stop, apparently. Not even other entities out there claiming they're resisting what's happening. It's important to really see how serious this is. Here's Douglas McGregor. It's on Kim Iverson's show, and he's talking about how obvious it is that what's happening in Iran is an intelligence operation. Retired Colonel Douglas McGregor. And he also says, let's be clear, what's going on in Syria is just another Mossad, MI6, CIA creation. We set out a long time ago to destabilize Syria. So in both, the point he's talking about in the clip is about Iran. But realize that, like we've been telling you, like anybody honest has been telling you, and frankly, probably the most obvious agenda in the entire conversation, that what Syria is an extension of all of this, of greater Israel from Israel's perspective, of the larger foreign policy kind of balkanization, the U.S. government's perspective. And you can show all this stuff. And it is run by an al-Qaeda offshoot while they claim they're fighting ISIS and al-Qaeda. That's how kind of just completely clumsy all this has gotten. They don't seem to care.
What you started with were very legitimate protests about the economic conditions in Iran. Those overlapped with a struggle, political struggle, between reformers and conservatives. This then was developed into a CIA, Mossad, MI6 operation with the introduction of thousands of these Starlight terminals, enormous quantities of money.
He meant Starlink, by the way, and I find that really important that he mentioned that, right? So even he is pointing out that Elon Musk's overlap is part of the intelligence operation, which really is not hard to recognize. I made this point every time in every single field of war since he's been central in this conversation, and probably before that we didn't see, he's been sending in Starlink, acting like he's for the people. But there's plenty of examples, even most importantly in the United States, where people need these things that you're not helping. There's been a couple of token examples, but then you find out he's charging them anyway. That was the U.S. government example. We talked about that. How crazy is that? People suffering from hurricane and they end up paying for the system. The point is that overseas, like he just did with Somalia, with Syria, with every single one of these locations, guys, he sends the Starlink with Iran, the same thing. And the evidence has come out that the Starlink sent to Iran happened long before we were at this position. They were secretly sent. It's obvious this is part of an operation because that's what it's actually about. But they'll keep floating you the token examples of helping people's arms move again. Or no, excuse me, of that Neuralink of a better internet. But the reality is, actually, let me see if I have that clip because that always blows my mind. Of Starlink satellites. Maybe not. Damn. I wish I think there it is. This is insane to me. Just the timeline of this. This is the Starlink discussion, and this is not about anything other than control, surveillance, and technocracy. Starting with 2019, the Starlink satellite, and a visualization of it, and how fast it is. How fast it one, 2, 3, 6 over 10,000. That's done. Look, that stops at 2024. Well, 2 years more. Look at that. This is the reality of the world that they're building, guys, and this is just one aspect of it. Now, I'll include these as always, right? Syria, the discussion he's overlapping, the reality of the ISIS patch wearing people that were being rolled out, executing people in the streets that were supported by Israel and the United States. It's all very easy to prove, on top of the fact that Israel is openly working with ISIS-linked gangs in Gaza, but none of this seems to matter to all the new media out there. Scott Horton also includes this back to Iran. The only reason Israel doesn't have good relations with Iran is because Israel forbids it. Here is John Marshmeyer discussing this with Piers Morgan. Now, I'll make a couple points to this, but it's important to hear this discussion. And, of course, Piers Morgan comes in with his usual stick and is kind of saying, pushing back on the idea that Iran is not a threat and makes the argument. Well, I'll let it speak for itself, but I'll make a couple comments on this because it's embarrassing, the effort to try to make the argument that Iran is a threat to the United States. It's all built on narrative. Like, you could argue that any country could be a threat to anybody. They have weapons, right? But where is the actual material evidence here? What's Iran done? They always point back to examples like Iraq or Syria, except for both the reality of those points are about them defending illegal invasions of the United States into these countries. But the reality is that there's no evidence that there's an immediate threat. There's all narrative. Everything they point to is Hezbollah and Hamas, despite those not even being the cases they make. On top of the fact that what's the U.S. been doing? Bombing and occupying and murdering and supporting genocide and just nonstop belligerence. That shouldn't represent every American, but it very much shows you that what they're projecting is what they're doing. Blaming other countries while they're trying to manipulate that country for Israel, which is transparent.
The idea that a country like Iran, which is no threat to the United States, or a country like Venezuela, which is no
Iran is no threat to the United States.
No, it's not. Why is it a threat to the United States?
Well, maybe because the Ayatollah has repeatedly threatened the United States.
Right. But when he says threaten the United States, what he means is threaten Trump mostly. But even the argument being that what he's doing is threatening the U.S. government that's belligerently threatening them. But let's just even say that, like he'll respond to, that he was just going, I'm going to go after the United States. Okay. Do Trump and whoever's in power in the UK, do these people not do this all the time? Of course they do. Now, that doesn't make two wrongs don't make a right. But the point is that if you're going to stand there and say that that means they're a threat, then that means that you have always been a threat to them. Maybe that's why you're, getting the reciprocal response. But on top, the main point is always is one thing's narrative, the other's action. The U.S. has narrative and it's got a ton of action. There's no action you can show of Iran threatening the United States. They're not encroaching on the U.S. territory. They're not bombing U.S. areas. It's just not the reality of it, guys. It's all narrative largely put out by Israel.
The Ayatollah has repeatedly threatened the United States publicly.
He can repeatedly threaten the United States till he's blue in the face. Who cares? The question is, does he have the military capability to do harm to us?
Yes, he does. I mean, I think that's an interesting statement because I think it's very clear that they do. And I think it's a constant underestimate, deliberately so, of their capabilities. But that's really not the point. So many other countries have them. Just because they have the ability does not mean that they're actually going to do it. The threat clearly exists just by default if they have weapons. So that's just kind of brings it all back to zero, right? If they all have them, then everyone's a possible threat. It's about whether there's actually a threat taking place, which I agree with John. I don't think it's the case.
Well, they've had the military.
In fact, if it wasn't for the...
Well, what they have done, they funneled a huge amount of money into propping up terrorist organizations.
Incorrect. Now, I shouldn't say incorrect because it's just as likely that Iran is funding actual terrorist organizations as any other government for its own purposes. That's how I view the reality of government. But the facts that he's pointing, or the information that he's referencing, is Hezbollah. And what they're talking about is support for a group that they align with ideologically. They are not some extension of Iran. They have agreements and alignments just like they do with groups, the PMU in Iraq. But it's not the same thing. If you want to talk about actual proxy elements, you could talk about Al-Qaeda, Hayat al-Sham, they run in Syria, ISIS in general, Hamas that Israel funded, or all the examples of how they're literally funding the very things they claim they're fighting. To point to these things from Iran is a manipulation. If you want to argue that they're okay, how about you even take an extension further and say, they funded Hezbollah. Show me the terrorist actions you're talking about. What are we talking about? Because the U.S. frames it as such. Where are the actions? Where are the bombings? That's not the reality of what they're talking about. They're engaged in certain locations, like in Lebanon or Hamas in Gaza, right? Or the Houthis in Yemen. But I mean, the Houthis are the best example as the Ansar Allah movement, really. What they discuss is that they're one of these extensions of the terror movement. They were literally just stopping genocide or shipments to it with these ships where they weren't killing anybody, that they weren't even sinking the ships, and they were letting them go the moment that they were turning back or once the agreements were made. Very terroristic, right? It's lazy what they're doing. But Pierce is not stupid. He knows this. He's parroting what he's supposed to be saying. This is more than most, I have a really frustrating, I have a low opinion of Pierce because of the way he tries to present himself as this middle objective, and he very much toes the line where it's necessary.
All around the Middle East, all of whom are wedded to the obliteration of Israel, which is...
Nope. And if you want to get into it and talk about Hezbollah or Hamas or any of them, it's very clearly, as even their charter will today state, not talking about the previous, that matters, but the reality of their current charter states Zionism, not even Israel itself. And it very clearly states the opposite of what they're claiming. That matters.
America's main ally in the region, and has a lot of mutual interest. Now, you may not like it, but that's the reality. And so, yes, they represent a threat to one of America's main allies and to Americans who live in Israel, for example.
No, that's not even the truth right there.
To American service people who work with Israelis.
Incorrect.
Of course.
I mean, only in the sense that you think that we're going to have to defend Israel's agendas, then maybe, yes, that would be the case, but that's what he's about to tell you.
They do.
But you're making the argument that they're not a threat to the United States, they're a threat to Israel. And because we're joined at the hip with Israel, anything that's a threat to Israel is a threat to the United States. I don't buy that argument. I'm an American firster. I care about the U.S. national interest. And it is not in our national interest to have this conflictual relationship with Iran. And if it weren't for the fact that the Israelis have so much power in the United States and insist that we keep Iran as an adversary, we would otherwise have good relations with the Iranians.
Especially because if you actually care to do your due diligence, most Iranians, including the government, are not adversarial towards Americans. It's just not. In fact, going back to Mossadegh, who they overthrew to bring in the Shah, he was very Americanized, very Western. Pictures of himself next to the Liberty Bell, was trying to emulate Western culture. It's very easy to look up, despite how they try to lie about that from an Israel perspective. And they overthrew him because he was unwilling, at least as I can tell, to bow to their interest at the expense of his people. So they got him out of the way, and they brought in somebody who made that exact statement. The same thing we see with stuff in Venezuela or anywhere else. The person who's willing to go, we will allow Chevron to come in. We will allow Israel to make a base every single time. And what do you talk about? The exportation. You know, what's interesting, we're going to get into this in a minute in regard to what Lutnick and the rest are saying about the global conversation. That what the WEF wanted was outsourcing and all this stuff. And then here they are doing that to other countries. You see, but really to you too, Americans. But the reality is that what you can see is not that they're going and saying, here, Venezuela, we saved you. Now it's all yours, because that's America first perspective, right? That would be Venezuela first. You can decide because we're nationalists, right? No, we're going to come in and we're going to outsource everything, and we're going to take all your resources, and we're going to call that America first. But it's really globalism. It's what it is. And it's frustrating how clear that is, guys. And so in this case, it's the same kind of conversation. I mean, it just becomes this kind of constant roundabout. I mean, the effort is always the same. And there are people like Scott Horton, for example, has been calling this out his entire life. Here is what Trump says in regard to Iran, should they threaten him. And I just think this stands out so clearly that Donald Trump, right, is somebody claiming that we're trying to save these people, right? I'm the peace president, he says. It's not true. It's embarrassing that even Trump still tries to say that. But the argument being that we're trying to save people and end wars, right? But here he says that should they threaten me, or should I be killed rather, that I've directed them to blow up the entire country. So very Samson option of Trump. I guess, yeah, I mean, basically similar option. The idea of Israel's Samson option, which you can look up for yourself, is very real, that if should they be threatened with this extinction, that they have directives to bomb everybody with nuclear weapons. It's not a joke. In this case, Trump is saying, if you kill me, then I have directions to bomb all of Iran. So explain for me how that means you're trying to help anybody. If your petty reaction is to kill everybody you can because you just got killed, then peace is just a byproduct, is a talking point for your real agenda. Did you see what I'm saying? Like, why would that be the response? I thought you were just trying to save all those people. It just doesn't make any sense unless you realize that what they're doing is just feeding you what you want to hear, and the agenda is clearly something else.
There are reports that they are still burning thousands of protesters alive. They also issued...
Oh, reports right out of Israel, by the way. Fresh reports right out of Tel Aviv. Iran's doing everything we want you to believe they're doing. The evidence coming about the protesters and everything has come through Israel intelligence and through places like CBS, Larry Ellison and Barry Weiss. In the beginning, nobody else even picked it up because there's nothing to verify it. But eventually it bleeds into the conversation and it becomes just, all these thousands of people have been killed while they're sharing videos from Miami and while they're sharing information from 12 years ago. And Amar Nafal keeps repeating things that are verified as false. Doesn't stop them, though. She'll just start it out as, we know this is happening. Now let's continue.
An assassination threat against you over the weekend. I know that you can't talk about what's on the table, but what is your response to Iran's leadership and their regime continuing to taunt you, threaten you, especially given over the weekend you said it's time for new leadership in Iran?
Right. Given how you just literally said that we're going to remove you from power, because that's totally okay, though. You know, and realistically, most of these times they're discussing are not about them going, we're going to murder you, Donald Trump. And they just frame it that way like they want to. But yeah, there's plenty of cases where they're arguing something much more serious, just like he does all the time. Nuking their entire country, like he says right here. Why is it not seen as a balanced conversation? Nuking the entire country, even after you're killed, is not a peaceful statement. The idea is they've made these statements. Trump has said, I'll do worse than you've ever seen before should you not take this deal. Dumb stuff like that. And then act like you're aghast that they'll even suggest they might respond, and that's their terrorism. It's a cartoon. That's how silly it gets when this is the kind of, when people have already chosen what side they're going to take. Trump could stand up and say the dumbest thing in the room, or Biden, by the way, if that's the circumstance, and the supporters will just go, that means everything. That's what it's the same conversation.
On the table, but what is your response to Iran's leadership and their regime continuing to taunt you, threaten you, especially given over the weekend you said it's time for new leadership in Iran?
Well, they shouldn't be doing it, but I've left notification. Anything ever happens, we're going to blow the whole country is going to get blown up. So we've.
Can you believe that he even said that? He's such a child. Like, it very much so. It's like he needs to be bombastic because he feels threatened. It's kind of embarrassing.
You know, originally Biden should have said something. You know, when they made a statement, we always said, why isn't Biden saying anything? Because he didn't. But a president has to defend a president. Like, if I were here and they were making that threat to somebody, not even a president, but somebody, like they did with me, I would absolutely hit them so hard.
Okay, but I don't think he realized he literally just said if they threatened somebody else, he would hit them so hard. So now if they threaten anybody else, you're going to bomb the entire country? My point is, I don't even think he means that. He's just talking off. He just says what he wants. This is embarrassing. As an American, we should all be embarrassed by anybody, left or right, who stands there and acts this ridiculous and then doesn't even mean half the things he's saying, if not any of them. Nothing means anything. It's about what he needs in that moment. And that's become shockingly clear to a lot of his followers, actually.
But I have very firm instructions. Anything happens, they're going to wipe them off the face of this earth.
Yeah, okay. That's pretty clear, right? Which means all the Iranian people. Peace president. Yay, hashtag winning. The only people doing that right now are blind followers. I'm telling you guys, they're the people that I often mention that are, somewhat closer to me, that are like I often point out, the ones that I know are good intentioned, but are falling for larger agendas or, believe what Trump said. These people are starting to, they're recognizing what's going on. And these are hardcore people that have supported this my entire life that are suddenly going, yeah, okay, this is not what I thought. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I'm telling you, if you just pay attention, it becomes that clear. It's happening every day. People are starting to see through this. And that is a positive thing as much as they try to make everybody uncomfortable. But here's the people like Laura Loomer, which, by the way, if you look at her engagement, which I find hilarious, it's shockingly down. And I think it's because in this case that the team doesn't want her to be seen right now. That's what I believe, because she's embarrassing, because what she does is so blatantly one-sided for one very clear entity that I think it's kind of showing the hand. Just an opinion, or nobody wants to see her content, but I don't think that's how this platform works. President Trump's approval rating is going to skyrocket even more if he bombs Iran and takes out the Ayatollah. Even his haters want him to strike Iran. It's just embarrassing how untrue that is. Not true. First of all, his haters don't want that. Most of his supporters don't want that. Ask Charlie Kirk. Ask any number of these major people. This is just her trying to scream the thing into reality. Because what else are they going to do? How embarrassing for you, Laura. So, a couple points I want to make before we get into likely tomorrow as well with the show we'll be doing then about ICE and Renee Good and so on. But I found this important for a couple reasons that I want you to miss. So you already saw this. We talked about it. Here's the article from the New Republic. New evidence reveals Renee Good was still alive when ICE blocked medic. That was the New York Times they're referencing with the report that they have. This is now a doctor in Minnesota who stood up and is telling you that he saw the report himself. Doctor just revealed Renee Good still has a pulse 8 minutes after she was shot by an ICE agent. A physician on scene offered to administrate aid. You already saw this. They were denied. In any courtroom, preventing medical aid after using deadly force isn't just cruel. It's aggravated. It's an aggravating factor. I just think this needs to be really digested, especially by people that were supporting this. That woman was alive, guys. She was a U.S. citizen shot in broad daylight for clearly illegitimate reasons. And as far as I can tell right now, they're resisting any kind of investigation. It's just unprecedented what we're seeing in this administration. It really is. And I'm not talking about like the larger, like I keep saying, like I think this is the continual gradual agenda. But I think what Trump and the way they're doing this, because of, I think, an overlap of the factors we talk about, whether Zionist or whatever else, it just, I think they have a design on making this look bad. And at the end of the day, this is, I mean, it's embarrassing. I feel like there's a word that just needs to describe this at a larger level than just how, as Americans just feeling like we're embarrassed by this. It's shocking. What they're doing is destabilizing to most people in this country. But maybe truly, I don't think they look at it this way, maybe we need a little destabilization to shake people awake to realize where we actually are. Prem Thacker points this out. Now, this I think this is why I want to include it for today. This very point speaks to the larger thing we're going to finish with, which is about the idea of this transition and the idea that what we're seeing right here very well seems to represent a secret police, as I think I might have included from James Lee. Maybe not. We'll get into it more in the next show. I'm thinking of the other tabs I have. But, he makes a point that this is the difference between police and secret police, right? But in this case, police, domestic entities, and then whatever else this is that's materializing. We're talking about another treasury overlap, another location of funds. We're talking about outside influence, Davos and WEF and the global discussion. And we're also talking about what appears to be a building national enforcement arm that seems to be reporting directly to one person. And this is what the local police have to say. And I find this fascinating and alarming, really, because what it's showing you is a divide between the enforcement arm in Minnesota and an enforcement arm from a national level. And what I've always talked about in the past, anybody who a student of history, one of pretty much the turning point in most of these situations is when the enforcement arm begins to turn. I'm hoping that's this. And as always, I'm not calling for violence or anything other than awareness about what the reality is.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Ruley, Police Chief of the City of Brooklyn Park. Behind me is a bunch of amazing police chiefs that are here in support of a very short but very important message that we want to share with you. What you won't hear from any of us today is rhetoric of abolish ICE or that there shouldn't be immigration enforcement. The truth is, immigration enforcement is necessary for our national security and for local security. But how it's done is extremely important.
And I'm actually really glad that he started like that because look, if it can't be all or nothing. If you're going to be objective and hopefully nonpartisan about this, then obviously then you have to agree with that. There is a level, let me put it this way. If we're dealing with a state of society, which I always have to say, if you don't understand what I mean by that, it's not important for this conversation. The reality being that since we're in the system we are, and if we're forced to exist within this, at the end of the day, that there are legal realities here. And if somebody is illegally in this country, then that has to be acknowledged as such. And it's important, but what he's getting into is about the way that this is done. For example, due process, guys. That was the big point at the beginning, that Trump got so many people to just disregard because, well, it was difficult. And it showed you the cowards in the room. It showed you the people who had no principles, right? And so in this case, what he's highlighting is that, yes, that matters. But the way it's done, right? The ends don't justify the means. Important. It's about how you get there on top of everything else.
In fact, we have a long history of working exceptionally well with our federal partners, including ICE agents, and we have seen the best of them perform their job extremely well in the past. With that said, recently, as the last 2 weeks, we, as law enforcement community, have been receiving endless complaints about civil rights violations in our streets from U.S. citizens.
Many of which, a ton of which I can prove to you. Now, in the next show, I've got probably 18 more examples I can break down from people all over the place highlighting these things. It's starting to come out from Republicans too.
What we're hearing is they're being stopped in traffic stops or on the street with no cause and being forced to demand paperwork to determine if they are here legally.
Which is a crime, which I can prove to you 100 times over. Right? Many people respond by going, oh, that's just Democrats lying about it. Yeah, it certainly could be, but it's also provable in tons of examples that we can show you, not just in Minnesota.
As this went on over the past 2 weeks, we started hearing from our police officers the same complaints as they fell victim to this while off duty.
Police officers. So you have police officers who are off duty who are being accosted and arrested or detained by ICE.
Every one of these individuals is a person of color who has had this happen to them.
How can you pretend that's not obvious? That every one of the police officers who are off duty who have been manipulated have been of color. Now, I've never been the one to make this only about race. There's plenty of people that in there that probably believe that they're fighting some evil force from Venezuela or that they're fighting some Democrat-led deep state overtake. Whatever narrative they think they're buying into, it's clear that there's a focus there. That has to matter. Are we trying to pretend that it's only that immigration or any of this is unique to a certain color? Not.
In Brooklyn Park, one particular officer that shared her story with me was stopped as she passed ICE going down the roadway. When they boxed her in, they demanded her paperwork, of which she's a U.S. citizen and clearly would not have any paperwork. When she became concerned about the rhetoric and the way she was being treated, she pulled out her phone. In an attempt to record the incident, the phone was knocked out of her hands, preventing her from recording it.
All of this is shockingly unconstitutional, which you all know. If this was Democrats doing it to Republicans, all these people that are turning their heads away right now would be up in arms and making it a case about how every Democrat or every Republican, it's the same thing that happens on both sides, right? One example becomes, that's what they all do. And Elon Musk goes 100% and make it all, it's the same game we're seeing everywhere.
The officer had their guns drawn during this interaction.
Why?
And after the officer became so concerned, they were forced to identify themselves as a Brooklyn Park police officer in hopes of slowing the incident and de-escalating the incident down.
They shouldn't have to.
The agents then immediately left after hearing this, making no other comments, no other apologies, just got in their vehicles and left.
Completely unjust and unaccountable. And they know they're doing that, guys. They knew it and they left. The moment that they recognized they were in too far, they left. Why? If they thought they had standing, why wouldn't they keep going? I thought no one was above the law.
I wish I could tell you that this was an isolated incident. In fact, many of the chiefs standing behind me have similar incidents with their off-duty officers. This isn't just important because it happened to off-duty police officers, but what it did do is we know that our officers know what the Constitution is, they know what right and wrong is, and they know when people are being targeted, and that's what they were. If it is happening to our officers, it pains me to think of how many of our community members are falling victim to this every day. It has to stop.
Yeah. I mean, so are you suddenly, as Republican team support players, now you don't support these police? Suddenly it's a choice based on their certain beliefs, which, by the way, I'm not saying that out of the nowhere. Look online. It's just insane, the level of hypocrisy. This is transparent. So this is a challenge between the local police and whatever this national entity is becoming. This militarized police force that is seemingly reporting directly to the executive branch. David J. Beyer points out another judge describes how ICE intentionally brake checks ICE observers trying to cause accidents. If the observers can't stop in time, it can label them domestic terrorists who weaponize their vehicles, which of course justifies for killing them. That's the way he wrote this. But guys, this is there's entire breakdowns of this, of how their tactics are to create the justification, conflicting direction, surrounding them. So whichever way they move, they can claim they're being hit. This is being used. And then also, let's not forget, as we just discussed, the Wall Street Journal's reporting that they're being benefited, they're gaining financially, even when they take someone who is a U.S. citizen. So whether or not they release the person afterward because they're not justified in taking them, they gain from it anyway. They've given them a profit motive to scoop up as many people as they can. They're profiling, as we can clearly prove, we'll go into more in the next show. On video, literally being caught going like, we don't know, we're trying to find out. Asking who they're there for. Are they illegal? Well, we're going to find out. That's a crime. So many people are okay with this for very dishonest and disgusting reasons. Aaron Melnick points out, by October 2025, fully 2 out of every 3 people arrested by ICE at large in American communities had no criminal record at all, not even traffic offenses. Hear that again. Based on their statistics, 2 out of every 3 people arrested by ICE as of October 2025 had no criminal record, not even traffic offenses. That's why I made this show. What was it? I thought that was the right word. Oh, wait, legal. There it is. This is important because we did this this was April 2025. And this was largely about the plane to people to El Salvador. Remember that actually happened? Funny how we don't talk about that anymore, how insane that was. And Trump threatening American citizens like 6 different times with deportations. Trump deportations revealed to be full of innocent people, legal immigrants with no criminal record. And we got so much pushback from all the screaming partisans out there. The reality is the stats from their own information will show you that right now. Doesn't seem to matter. Truth Out put out this report. ICE agents pose as utility workers to detain immigrants, Oregon lawmakers warn. None of this is legal, guys. This is about the same as Israelis dressing up like Palestinians and then jumping out and shooting people. That's the reality of the kind of way they're conducting this. Oh yeah, let's not forget that they're being trained by the IDF, which is not a secret. People deny this, but I've proven this 10 times over like anybody who cares to look. It's a public program, and there's veterans coming back and speaking about it. Dr. Alex Zek points out, it doesn't matter whether it's demanding people on the street prove their vaccine status under threat of detainment, or demanding people on the street prove their citizenship status under threat of detainment. See how easy that is to break down? Both are wrong. Both are unconstitutional. Both are anti-freedom. So this is what's so confounding for honest people, is that on some cases, you've got Democrats who are 100% okay with you being detained and arrested for not proving your vaccine status, while going, but you shouldn't be taking those people who are illegal immigrants or people who aren't, or whatever the reality is. You shouldn't be doing the same thing over there. Then you've got Republicans who are outraged, rightly so, about you being detained for vaccine status, who are completely okay with taking people off the streets without having any information about whether they're here illegally or not. These are both hypocrites. And I'm of the mind that most Americans are very rapidly becoming aware of that very circumstance. He writes, if you support either of these things, you've fallen for political propaganda and divide and conquer tactics, and you are helping build the machine that will eventually be used on you. Very much respect this man today. I mean, I always have. We have disagreements in the past, but I've said it from the very moment that he's always had a principled stance in regard to these conversations, whether we disagree or not. I respect that more than anything else in the conversation. Now, talking about the globalist overlap to all of this, as we've demonstrated many different points of censorship, of financial manipulation, of the building of the police force, or whatever you want to look at it as. These are all smaller examples of how these things are sort of being organized in a different way. Trump spoke at the World Economic Forum, went to Davos, brought the largest, retinue, whatever you want to call it, the largest delegation is what I think they called it. But apparently he just went there to go, you're all wrong and globalism sucks and everything's bad and raw and national. No, didn't really do that, despite the fact that that's how it's always framed. I'll go over what they want you to think is happening, and I'll show you what I think is really happening. But the reality, like last year, was they went up and they said, woke pronouns are bad. And I use that as an example. There was other things there was a law, he spoke forever. But when you look at the things they support, not the narrative discussions, not the left-right dynamic or Trump screeching about how no one respects him, it's obvious that what you can see is the agenda continues left or right. Sort of like Biden and Harris's agreement that Trump continues. It's the same dynamic. So what did they do after the last Davos discussion? Well, Trump rolled out everything we talk about with the COVID-19 discussion. We talked about, everything he did in his first administration, which are stepping stones for where we are now. This one is even worse. He gets up and he speaks about how his administration in a lot of different ways presents the idea that globalization is dead. And even Larry Fink, who's currently on his inside circle, gets up and says, no one trusts us anymore and the global effort's over or something. I'll show you this. And then they go on to outline the global agenda, which every single point of it, Trump is currently involved in. But Alex Jones wants you to believe it's all been defeated because they said so. Because it's obvious that Larry Fink says something that has to be the truth, right? Right, Jones? Well, George Galloway is not stupid, so here's what he says. Shocked, I tell you, when Larry Fink says, Davos the title says, Larry Fink tells Davos he is shocked the global elites have lost the public trust.
The world now places far less trust in us to help shape what comes next. If the World Economic Forum is going to be useful going forward, it has to regain that trust.
Right. So this is kind of what they're using, based on some other statements from Lutnick, to argue that that's all over and globalism's done. Because, a couple of words at a global event apparently means it's all over, right? That's the kind of journalism you're getting from these people. Recognize that this is a major event hosted on the content, on the foundation of globalism, of public-private partnerships that Trump and his whole team came to speak at, and that everything they're doing aligns with pretty much everything that they're rolling out. I'm going to make this more clear than ever today with the study about the network state. And all of them are on the page when it comes to digitalization, tokenization, turning Gaza into a technocratic city. Even the idea of the network state is the same overlapping point when you see the end game for what they're pushing. So here, I'm just pointing that Galloway just, he has other comments around this. Here's BlackRock's Larry Fink abruptly becomes part of Trump's inner circle, April 6, 2025, which, by the way, shouldn't be that hard to recognize, seeing as how we've talked about this going back to the, as I called the COVID coup, at least the financial side of it. During Trump's last administration, the BlackRock takeover of American interests, right? It's been clear the entire time. It's just about narrative control, right? So obviously the point is Larry Fink is part of Trump's team. So if he's standing up and saying we've lost support from, the global elites have lost support of the people, well, he's talking about their agenda. And even if you disagree with that, Trump set to dominate Davos, says DW, in 2026, weeks after attacking Venezuela, capturing controversial leader. After reviving Greenland ambitions, the U.S. president's presence in Davos is expected to raise the stakes at the WEF annual meeting. Feel free to read into it. It's interesting how people want to frame this as him bucking the system when it's just him building this up at the end of the day. Here's concerned citizen. The Trump administration and I are, and this is what Lutnick was saying, are here to make a very clear point. Globalism has failed. Oh, he said it. It's over, guys. We won. It's sort of like Trump winning the election the first time, and they go, we did it. It's over. We're all. How'd that work out? Did we win? Is it all over? Or are we now being thrust into the globalist agenda? Okay. So he said this, though. You can listen to it. It's 2 minutes. David Icke says, you're entitled. Oh, he says in there, you're entitled to have borders, which obviously, regardless of the global point, it's just funny how they love to make this all black and white. But he goes, oh, really? Does that include Venezuela, Canada, Greenland, etc.? Oh, you got to love that, right? That's my point from before. So they're telling you it's about America first and we hate globalism. And they sure as hell project a lot of that to Americans and their interests around their borders. What are they doing everywhere else? The exact opposite, as the point he's making. What about Venezuela? What about Greenland you're going to seize? What about everything else you're talking about? Mexico and the technate and the map you're or overthrowing foreign countries, allowing Israel to occupy Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, and plenty more. Obviously, that is the overarching globalist discussion of the growing the influence sphere. But they just don't want Americans to see that. He says this ultra-Zionist, that's who Lutnick is, Israel firster also, is telling the ever-diminishing Trump base, see, David sees it, what it wants to hear while serving the very system they theatrically condemn, but don't mean. David gets it. I mean, he's been calling this out long before anybody, guys. Here is the Alex Jones InfoWars show, and it says, the New World Order is dead. It's so funny to me. Watch the WEF co-chair, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, the guy that's in inner circle with Trump that he won't tell you about, openly admit that globalist elites have lost the public's trust, which, by the way, why is that even remotely? Why? Of course they have. Since a long time ago. That's what we're all calling out. It doesn't mean they've stopped the agenda. That seems like a pretty lazy overlap. Nothing new. They face an age of populism with deep institutional mistrust. Cool. David Icke says, the New World Order is not dead. It's moving to its next phase of AI tyranny facilitated by Fink's mate, Trump, creating the chaos to dismantle the old system. The naivety is stunning. Well, I think he also has argued another point. That's not about naivety. He's not naive. He's willfully ignorant. This is about whatever it is that he is hiding the reality of this. Jones, the team on InfoWars. Now here is Alex doing the same thing. Same pose. Watch Trump admin officials tell the tyrannical globalists that their anti-human New World Order is dead. Oh, is that what Trump did? It's just pathetic, guys. Feel free to watch all of it if you really want to waste your time and laugh at people like this who are just pandering to everything that they told you they were fighting. And David Icke says Alex Jones is so naive and desperate that he actually believes ultra-Zionist Lutnick means it. Head shaker. Out with the old cult system and in with the new, even more extreme. That's what he's saying. Theater. You will hear this manipulative crap throughout Davos from Trump and his delegation. Yes, you will. Not like this proves anything. It's just a statement by one person, but I still find it humorous that we're literally over here saying the New World Order is dead, and people who are discussing what Trump's trying to accomplish are saying this.
Davos, we know there's the big housing speech. What else can we anticipate? There's also going to be some look at the new world order that President Trump is creating, and.
Now, of course, as I said last time, that doesn't have to mean the new world order, some specific organization, or simply just could mean the order of the world that he's creating, right? A new order for the world, which is exactly what I'm talking about. That's what we're discussing. Then you could get into the deeper meanings around that. No way am I suggesting those aren't important, but just recognizing the immediacy of the point, they're telling you on the surface of this, before we even get into the next part, that this is what they're doing. And that's not even like, again, you could pull that away and just look at the reality of where we are. It's self-evident that that's what's happening. They're creating a new digital currency. So we're going to get rid of the Fed and bring something else, and we're going to abolish these groups and bring something new in. We're transitioning into the digital age, technocracy, all of it. They're telling you all of this. Meanwhile, Israel completely changes the face of international law. It's just not hard to recognize this is happening. And I said, told you. And I show the discussion I had here about Trump and the Zionist globalist technocrats are building this new society, whether you like it or not. And the network state coup, the engineered transition to tech Zionism, which is what one of the leaders of the movement and others have called it themselves. So let's talk about this. Now, I think it's important to end on this point in particular because of how clear this is about the overlap with what they're doing. Now, here is a study that I found. This is called, quote, "If the News is Fake, Imagine History. The Network State and the Second Bourgeois Revolution." Now, this was, again, where was the date again? This is 2024. Now, this is very interesting to me. Now, this is just, really just one person's perspective from, I guess, a scientific, but we all know how these things objectively, look at it objectively like anything else, whether it's science, whether it's an article. We saw during COVID that just because it's science doesn't mean that it's absolute. The point is that this is just a overview of this person's scientific, rather academic perspective of what the network state agenda is. And they mention all the same, Prospera and plenty of points in this. I find this very relevant. Now, this is discussing the larger agenda discussed by Balaji Srinivasan from it was the former CTO of Coinbase, I believe. Yeah. And he's also the former general partner at Andreessen Horowitz, Mark Andreessen, one of the central parts of this large agenda. So it says, in highlighting how societies dominated by private property restrict human freedom. So what I want to highlight here as we go through, this is just the abstract. We're going to go through the whole thing. That one of the main things we talk about, we all remember, right? You'll own nothing and be happy. Well, one of the arguments of what they're doing here is sort of at least framed as the opposite. To say, well, we're going to give you well, in many cases, the digital keys to kind of digitally own all of your stuff. Not the same thing if you understand where this goes, but also just in a material sense that, you'll own all the rights to your, it's a separate way they're framing this. But when you get deep into the weeds, you'll find out that it kind of ends up in the same point. And I believe this is the larger play. Like I said before, you have the Great Reset presented during the, COVID-19 left-run administration, and carried out and discussed through all that during the WEF and everything else. And now you've got this kind of secondary part of this, which in a weird way, you can see the WEF endorsing if you really understand what's happening and what they discussed and how it aligns with Trump's agendas. And ultimately, then you have the tech side of this, and you got the Palantir elements and all the rest of it, Silicon Valley, and funding and driving this change through in this case, through the Republican side of what I would see as the Great Reset. And as always, the two sides drive us to a place where, in many ways, we pretend we picked this for ourselves. Now, in highlighting how societies dominated by private property restrict human freedom, and ultimately showing that, basically dominated by societies where you own your own property, ultimately can restrict your freedom. And there's different ways to frame it. And it says, I argue that the creation of zones like the network state are instead a reflection of our epoch's major dynamic, the attempt to shift the rights of capital and the authority over those rights to the transnational level, right? So yeah, you may be presented with something where ultimately you feel like you have more control over your property, but at the end of the day, this is a transitional phase to segue this into sort of like you allow your stakeholders to control all that, which is kind of this, almost exactly the same point, just framed differently. And this is what he's arguing worth considering, that again, it's the attempt to shift the rights of capital and the authority over those rights into the transnational level, which is globalism, in my opinion. So there's a ton of interesting information in here. I'm going to jump to part 3, which is exit and coercion in the network state. Now, as it reads, make sure this is where I'd started to. Yeah, okay. As with all visions of freedom, that place private property at the center. However, we are, wait, hold on, make sure to read that weird. As with all visions of freedom that place private property at their center, however, we are left with the question, what type of freedom and for whom? Right? Because the assumption should not be that means for everybody, because historically, these elitists will see it as if we are profitable, then you will benefit from that. Or if we're free, then that will trickle down. That's not the way this ever works in history. So what type of freedom and for whom? It says, as Robertson notes, 1995, capitalism has long been legitimized by the image or story of the individual property owner who works their own land, or the entrepreneur who identifies a market opportunity and adeptly capitalizes on it. In the network state, referencing the actual book, the tech founder plays the same role. An innovative builder who is stymied at every turn by the centralized state, tapping into something we all seem to be growingly concerned with, the centralization of power. And it says, which in the case of the United States and China is interpreted as seizing tech assets in order to become total surveillance machines and tools of social control, right? Which we all see. So highlighting what these very people, and I'm talking literally these, like the Teal Silicon Valley overlap, have been involved with building and pointing to the problem they helped build to say, well, we have to get away from that kind of centralized control. Okay. And I think we all largely agree with that. Problem, reaction, solution. These stories work to conceal, he writes, a significant reality. However, because capitalist private property can only exist by negating individual private property. Since capital concentrates and centralizes as it expands, capitalism is necessarily a system of socialized capital, of corporate ownership and control over the means of production, which in turn denotes neither ownership and control by those who must work for another to live. Now it says the freedom suggested by Srinivasan is only freedom for the class of network state founders and owners of private property. Now, you may think, well, I'm going to be one of those, but that's not how this is working. Ask people in Prospera. All right, you can choose to come live and exist in this. They claim you can come and go and leave and seize your assets as you see fit, but we'll get into that. But the point is that you're technically not the owner. You're not the stakeholder. That is the class of network founders and the owners of that private property you exist within. Now, again, this is multifaceted. There's arguments, and not every one of these is the same. I don't want to make it sound like you should consider whether there's a good version of this somewhere, right? Or that maybe one of these are that they have good intentions, or ask this. I'm trying to highlight how I think, one, the people involved with this have stated their intentions, and it concerns me, and two, that the larger agenda could very well be started in good intentions, which ultimately leads to the same thing that we were fighting before. But so what it's talking about here is that the what was it again? Oh, right. So if let's say you move there in some of these places where you can't actually own some of this property. I think where this gravitates toward is the centralization of that through some kind of a new civilization style that we're going to discuss as we go through this more, which will convince you that somehow by allowing them to be the steward, for example, of your rights to these things, and that you own the private keys from the blockchain to prove that you own these things. Well, there's a conversation to be had, right? Especially since that's where this world goes. That's the digital aspect of it. And even with the cryptocurrency, if it's being held on Coinbase, for example, right now I can access that. But what if tomorrow they go, well, no longer. I decide you're a criminal and I'm not going to let you have it, which seems to happen a lot. Well, they actually own that. You have access to it as long as they allow you to. And that's a point to think about with the way they're building all of this. And I could be off base. Maybe they have the best of intentions and that's going to be built into it. But right now, as he's writing as well, I've already talked about this, I get the sense this is about setting that up. A situation where you feel like you're in control, but you're not. That's the way they do this, guys. It's Maggie Simpson in the car, okay? You're driving, you think that's everything we've seen from our government as far back as I can look. Now, it says these contradictions are most clear in Srinivasan's description of the network state as a new digital frontier. I mean, how do we miss that in the conversation of the way they're talking about Gaza and the technocratic state they're building there? That's their term. Trump discussing a technocratic leadership in places like Somalia and places like Honduras. It's not a secret. And so here they're telling you this new digital frontier, and that should make us concerned if we were at all concerned about the digital direction, digital IDs, and everything we talked about. Now it says, yet in the same way that his claims about freedom obscure who benefits from that freedom, so too does the concept of the frontier work to conceal what is being proposed. Now they talk about this new frontier, right? That's Trump and the new frontier and the freedom cities, which is all funded by the same groups. That's Pronomos Capital, Thiel, and Andreessen. It's the same conversation. So Prospera over here is the freedom city in the United States. It's the same agenda, despite how hard they tried to keep those things seen as separate, which says a lot to me. But in this case, the frontier being whatever this new setup is, where you can go out there and, like, let's say you're unhappy with this setup in the United States, you can go to the frontier and live in the new West, the way they're trying to frame it. But as it says, yet in the same way that his claims about freedom obscure who benefits from that freedom, so too does the concept of that frontier they're presenting to you kind of work to conceal what is actually there. It says, in seeing the frontier as being reopened in 1991, digital sense, with the legalization of commerce on the internet. Srinivasan in 2022 positions Bitcoin, Web3, and the open metaverse as giving the digital frontier a new lease on life. Now, I found that interesting because Whitney and I, well, really Whitney more than anybody, she's the one that set up this conversation with me. 2021. This is Derek's article, the Great Narrative and the Metaverse, a dystopian vision of the future. This is one written by Derek as well. Blending reality, the WEF calls for the creation of the metaverse identity and latest push for digital dystopia. I actually thought I had the other one up. I'll try to find it and include it. But there's a conversation that Whitney and I had about this exact conversation going back like way before this was even right here we go. This is for her limited hangout. Facebook and the metaverse. And we talk about where this seems to be going. This is back in 2021 and talking about how the metaverse was being built for exactly what he's describing it as for the future of the network state agenda. Just yet again, showing you how far ahead she's seeing these things, like just incredible. And so in this case, highlighting back in 2022, how the metaverse and all these different elements were going to basically create that new frontier, which is in a fake area, fake zone, right? But it's interesting. And I just think it's important to think about the way that they were framing this. Now, it goes on to say, but this hides the fact that prior to 1991, the internet was a government-created public entity. It's making an analogy point here, right? So you could say this new frontier, right? But, well, it was a government thing created and managed by, so it wasn't a free, so it may appear as if you're freely engaging on the internet like we think today, but it's not really the case when you break it down. The very closing of the digital frontier that Srinivasan attributes to centralization and workification is in reality the result of the privatization of the internet's infrastructure and the enclosure of digital space in the form of the platform, both of which have since facilitated a state corporate nexus of surveillance capitalism, which is the sort of deregulation that Srinivasan proposes would have the opposite effect. Now, it doesn't mean it's always going to go that direction, but think about what he's saying here, is that based on the idea of what they're projecting for the real world version of a similar thing, that we have this Prospera area, you can go out there in the frontier and live the way you like. But what he's saying is, in this case, the privatization of the internet's infrastructure and the enclosure of digital space into things like Twitter have given you the illusion of this, but ultimately because of that very privatization, the idea that like what they're discussing with, coming in and doing what you want and your own genetic engineering or whatever they're doing there, that you basically create this state captured, rather in privatized, what do you frame it as? It's a sort of the deregulation that he proposes would have the opposite effect, but it ultimately created the state corporate nexus of surveillance capitalism. Because at some point, if this is also like a fascistic point, that you get the government that is completely immersed and overlapped with these corporate entities for both of their benefit at the expense of everybody else. Because you can't, when you, like, that's the public-private partnership. You try to go, well, we want to see what the government's doing. Hey, it's a private company. You can't see. And if you want to do the other way around, well, it's the government, so we don't have access. It's set up in that way. Now, again, it might not go this way in the real world. But it says, instead of producing a landscape of innovative startups, for example, it would lead to the same sort of extractivism, that's what it is, extractivism, financialized, oligopolistic, and rent-generating dynamics from past innovations that we have already seen under neoliberalism. It's basically the same kind of point, being that this is the idea of the liberal world order that's really just like everything else, collected power at the top and created this kind of the same problem every time, because guess what? Whether communism or fascism or whatever it is, government, in my opinion, as I think we're seeing, will end up in the same place, which is why we should consider a different path, by the way. But says for Srinivasan, more of the poison is somehow the cure. In stating that, quote, we want to be able to peacefully start a new state for the same reason we want to bear a plot of earth, direct quote, to build something new without historical constraint, which sounds like, of course, that sounds like something we would be arguing, right? But it says Srinivasan ends up proving a previous writer's point that frontiers are zones of unmapping, in which, this is important for the world today, pre-existing peoples and practices are simply papered over. Here, we need to not rely on theory, but can instead look at the real example of Prospera. And this is a 2022, I think they wrote this, a semi-autonomous charter city in Honduras, of which Srinivasan was an investor. Created under the since overturned Zone for Employment of Economic Development law, Prospera had no import or export taxes, and its owners utilized their own security forces, courts, and legal systems. Despite the absence of the nation state in the day-to-day operations of the city, as Slobodian notes, the making of Prospera was only made possible, it's the point they made on the fundraiser, by relying on the violence of the nation state through, quote, thousands of illegal detentions and murders and disappearances of protesters and activists. If you're going to build this on the back of an illegal U.S. regime change and then an illegal overthrow of power and what they just outlined from the power that they put in place, which is what happened, the guy Trump pardoned, the major drug dealer, this is what they did to people. It's very well documented. How can you then argue that, say, first of all, this is the ends justify the means kind of a point? That's not libertarianism. That's not what I'm talking. It's the opposite, in my opinion. And what we're dealing with here is like I've talked about, the sort of creation of using what we're calling for to get us on board with something that appears that way, but really is a bait and switch. That's what I believe this is. And as they're going to get into even more, that in any of these locations, whether Honduras or other places they'll reference, you're talking about places where people already have lives and exist. So why is it your right because how is that libertarian to seize other property? It's just, even from the beginning point. Now it continues, in using the frontier concept to obscure the violent reality of settler colonialism. Similarly obscures that in moving from the infinitely expandable digital realm to the finite world of physical land populated by living humans, network states will necessarily engage in the same sort of appropriative violence as the institutional enforcer of a neo-colonial private property regime. In recent podcasts, as I've already told you, Srinivasan makes that very clear, stating what I'm really calling is for something like tech Zionism. That doesn't need to be explained. Look at what Zionism is doing right now. Look at what they're proudly supporting. Ask the worst elements of what they're doing, or the most prominent, rather. Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, even Netanyahu. They're literally calling for the ethnic cleansing of these people. They're calling, it's rooted on the seizing of territory illegally for the benefit of their agenda. And he's calling it that. This just has to be a wake-up moment. Now, I understand why certain people would want to see the good parts of this. Like I discussed, hiring your own enforcement arm, and the idea of what that would really be like in a society built on that. But you don't, if you're starting on seizing illegally, if you're starting on power exchange for your benefit, this is not what it appears to be. And let's just even say maybe that it has the best of intentions. The fact that you started this way builds on the premise that we can take what we want when it matters. That's what the world is seeing from these administrations and the people that it supports. I think that's one of the most important realities here. Now, it continues, while it is common to view these transformations as part of the neoliberal project, I see them, as the writer says, more broadly as a result of the dynamics of the ongoing centralization and concentration of capital, as indicators of an emerging global property regime in the making, which denationalizes specific elements of the nation state in the process. See how it would look one way, but at the end of the day, behind the scenes, the Andreessens and Thiels and whoever else you're talking about, the real power players, are in fact centralizing control over certain things, concentrating capital under the guise of a digital held key. That's what this appears to be. An emerging global property regime in the making, where ultimately they, as the stakeholders, own everything and you are just happy. You own none of it. You got your keys. We'll give you your digital keys and we'll hold it all back here. And you've never been happier. At the end of the day, it's the same agenda. Likewise, where Dean 2023 suggests that zones are emblematic of an emerging neo-feudalism, which I think is, the fact that he even uses that term is interesting, because that's the entire premise of this episode, of the capital, the funding arm of it, and whether it's Pronomos or Pronomos capital, and the rapid transition to a techno-feudal state. That's what this is all about in this episode, 2025. Saying that what they're doing suggests that zones are emblematic of an emerging neo-feudalism, reflecting the same sort of parcelization of sovereignty that characterized the feudal epoch. They fail to register the novelty of this dynamic, or hypocrisy, really. I mean, so what you're saying is that you, like with Honduras, is the best example, especially since and I didn't even mention that, realize what they did through manipulation of that election, which it's been well documented, was put people back in place who were literally connected to the original people that allowed this to happen in the first place. Even though legally speaking, the last administration already made what they're doing illegal. They're just probably going to reinstitute these laws because like I said, they didn't do anything this entire year span because I think they were waiting for the U.S. government to do this. I quite literally think I've been proven correct. That they came in, they manipulated the election, put somebody back in place that they wanted, and now Prospera just doesn't even miss a beat. Even though the entire time it's been illegal that they've been doing this since the administration years ago made their special zone illegal. I mean, aside from the fact, on top of the illegal coup that created the circumstance, they manipulated the court system. They removed judges to get in place to get this zone in the first place. It's wild that a libertarian could pretend that this is how you should start something like this. And it continues. If there is anything to be taken from the historical comparison to feudalism, it is that our period shares more similarities with the period of absolutism, a period in which new property relations were emerging within the shell of older state structures, transforming them in the process, providing substance to claims that globalization represents a second bourgeois revolution. I mean, to me, that's the bait and switch, right? The idea that you're part of some new, it's a bait and switch. This is, in my opinion, the same globalist elements, the same Great Reset, the same dynamics being framed as you. I mean, this is the same thing I keep talking about, right? Whatever, I showed you that one earlier, right? The fake globalist movement under the guise of fighting globalism. It's just, or however I frame that. Like, there are people out there acting like they're fighting all this, while what they're really doing is building the foundation. That's what I believe anyway. Now it says, in the same way that the bourgeois revolutions extended the rights constitutive of feudal towns and fairs to the entire sovereign territory, so too are the new global assemblages of territory, authority, and rights being created deep within national territories to facilitate the use of blockchain technology for transnational accumulation activities. It's exactly what it sounds like. Where Slobodin 2021 sees state involvement with blockchain technology as evidence of its failure to escape the state, it says, I see it instead as the means by which new forms of global private property are legitimized within the old order, redirecting the role of the state toward the enforcement of transnational property relations. That's the global. See, it's no longer a state; it's transnational. And think of how you have an AI fundamental like that. What they're talking about without some kind of a larger transnational element, because that's what they're really building. That's what Trump is literally building out. It says, I see it as instead as the means by which new forms of global private property are legitimized within the old order, redirecting the role of the state toward the enforcement of transnational property relations, transforming it in the process. In this respect, the network state, like the Dark Enlightenment or the Seasteading Institute, all parts of the same conversation, can be read as a hyper-situational project. That's interesting. I thought that's something else. How do you say that? Institutional? Project to generalize the global economic rights already processed. By the way, what it means is The general. Oh, that's hold on. Let me just do it this way. Is an adjective derived from hyperstatistician. I don't think I've even heard that. The concept coined by philosopher Nick Land, the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit in the mid-90s, describes ideas or narratives that become real through their own existence. Huh, that's fascinating. I have to look into that more. But anyway, it's to generalize the global economic rights already possessed, by transnational corporations. So aside from that, the point being can be read as a project, as we just described, as something that's they're like putting into reality by simply creating it, already possessed, but basically the to generalize the global economic rights that's already possessed by transnational corporations. So you can see, like the Palantirs or anything else, this is sort of a transition of control over assets, of power into the hands of these corporations, which, why is it better than a government? Or why should any of them have control over your assets? It says it is not a state for you or I, but one for a globalizing capital coming to you into its own. Telling you guys, if at the very least, consider that what this really is the real transition of the new style of governance beginning to come into its own. Now it says, as it ends, as part of a global dynamic of accumulation that is attempting to extend private property rights outwards across national territories and inward into new domains, the network state is a politico-ideological reflection of a movement already underway, working to normalize the view that the only safe and orderly future is a global, blockchain-mediated capitalism without democracy, serving up the cause of the current crisis as the solution. Whether private property is enforced as a decentralized form of rule, the concentration and centralization of capital necessarily concentrates and centralizes power. And without political or social rights to mitigate this power, there is only increased domination. At the very least, I hope people can consider what this is saying. Because I'm telling you, this is so transparent to me right now. Now, weirdly enough, the Great Reset page from the World Economic Forum is not there anymore. I wonder why they took that down. I actually genuinely think they don't want people comparing it to what's going on. My opinion. Here is an overlapping point. This is just one. It actually was like another page pointing to it they don't longer have, but simply saying now is time for the Great Reset or a Great Reset. And it simply says, you can read this as well, the rest of it, to achieve a better outcome, the world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economies, from education to social contracts and working conditions. Now, aside from the jointly and revamp together, what are they describing? Changing, revamping societies, economies, education, social contracts, working conditions. Is that exactly what they're doing? Yes. So you can argue that maybe they are at odds. Maybe they just have their own version of the way the Great Reset should go. Both, however, are still a Great Reset. Now include Derek's great work of the Welcome to the Palantir World Order. And it's really just about the Palantir explosion in this country. But it's if you read this in the context of what we're discussing, it really does paint an obvious picture for how this is much bigger than just surveillance. It is the new order, guys. That's what we're talking about. And as I've recently discussed, here's Trump talking about 5G and 6G, just kind of almost joking about exactly what this shows you. And these are all smaller points, but as I said last night, this is the Great Reset. Here's what he was saying.
So we're into 6G now. I just finished 5G. I was a leader on 5G, getting that done. And now they're up to.
Sure, because I'm sure all the Republicans are like, yeah, 5G is what we voted for. Is it? No.
6. Let's do it again. What does that do? Give you a little bit deeper view into somebody's skin? See how perfect it is?
It's not a joke, by the way. That's actually real. And I think it's insane that they can joke about it. And I think but the fact that he joked about it actually caused people to pretend that it wasn't real. That's kind of probably the point. But the reality is the kind of technology they're discussing. This is part of the larger agenda, the AI discussion. All of this was part of the Great Reset. Here is even RFK Jr.'s old platform, and he was a part of this when it was put out. Military's expanded role in 5G could lead to mass data collection, tracking, monitoring of U.S. citizens. Well, gee, looks like we're already there. Too bad we weren't paying attention. I'll include a bunch of stuff about 5G if you want to look further. Derek wrote this in 2020. New Hampshire releases bombshell report questioning the safety of 5G. Trump's FCC, 2025, he wrote this. Trump's FCC seeks to strip even more local control over 5G rollout. just like it is with everything else, and AI included, even though it violates states' rights, and even though this is part of the global agenda. Trump quietly signs 5G law under the cover of coronavirus. I put this out in 2020, got over 1 million views, and that's how I got my account censored on YouTube. And here's an article from Derek discussing something similar. Does a newly published study prove 5G COVID-19 connection? Here, MSM frantically hides how Omicron is being spread by the injected. That's a different point. Then the study finds COVID 5G correlation. Really just the side effects and how they correlated. They didn't like talking about that, though. Lastly, I thought I would include this because we did get into this. Dr. Rashid Buttar. Remember this guy? Very early in the conversation, he was out there calling this out. He unfortunately passed away. Why COVID-19 is not what you think. In 2020, April 24, he was talking about the 5G overlap and what it did to your body and what could have, I mean, it's worth considering all of this. And my point, though, is about not whether this is all exactly what happened, but that Republicans were up in arms about all this stuff. Where are they right now as Trump is rolling out this future? Most of them are actually calling this out, in my opinion. It's the people with all the reach and influence who all been bought off, manipulated, or lied about who are doing something different. Now, to finish, here's Larry Fink. You know, the guy 30 seconds ago that Lutnick and Jones and everybody else was telling you, they just told you it's all over. The World Economic Forum is over. The New World Order has failed. Okay. Well, after they pretended that, here's what Lutnick was telling you at Davos.
The movement towards tokenization, decimalization is necessary. It's ironic that we see two emerging countries leading the world in decimalization, in the tokenization and digitization of their currency. That's Brazil and India. I think we need to move very rapidly to doing that. We would be reducing fees. We would do more democratization by reducing more fees if we had all investments on a tokenized platform that you could move from a tokenized money market fund.
That's starting to sound familiar at all? You know, I don't know, kind of sort of exactly what we're talking about with the network state, just an overlap.
To equities and bonds and back and forth. We have one common blockchain. We will, we can reduce corruption. So I would argue that, yes, we have more dependencies on maybe one blockchain, which we could all talk about. But that being said, the activities are probably processed and more secure than ever before.
Yeah, hardly. I mean, the idea being that what they're talking about is not going to be secure for you, right? This is about the compartmentalization of everybody else and then the power structure. I mean, and on top of the fact that these are the very people that we're actually worried about. I love how they always frame it as that this will be safe. We're worried about you guys looking, not some random guy in a hood, whatever they want to frame it as, some weird hacker over there. That people, yes, have concerns about random hacking. But the real concern about privacy is about the government, which, by the way, that ship has sailed. But that's the point about it. We're worried about you guys having ubiquitous access to everything that we own, everything that we talk about. So when he says that, you think they're going to box themselves out? No, that's long since passed. So it's just a manipulation. But as he's talking about that, you know who discusses that exactly? Pretty much everybody in Trump's administration, but Larry Ellison. Very avidly speaks about the digitization and the tokenization and that everything's surveilled. And that's the world everyone will be watched and everyone will be on their best behavior. That's Larry Ellison, along with Lutnick and plenty of others talking about the same thing. I just want to casually point out that that's the Stargate project. There's Larry Ellison. One also controlling the media right now through CBS, all the same conversations everyone's having. It's not a joke. I mean, literally as the leading element that's bought these news organizations and put people who are dishonest in control of them so they can control the narrative. It's not a secret. But that's Trump's guy right there. Part of the team, right? Okay, so as he's telling you that's the direction, because Trump got up and said bad things over here, does that mean this is stopping? Alex Jones? No, it means it's continuing. So why would it be over if what he's describing as the globalist effort is still going and Trump's a part of that? Explain for me why that's suddenly over, Jones, because they yelled something out loud that you want to point to? We can't be that childish. Here is the next point. Oh, look, it's Bill Gates, the other guy that's completely inner circle with Donald Trump right now and met with him, I think, 5 times since 2025 to talk about vaccines that they're all promoting, including the Trump administration, despite the lies they tried to spin. Here's him talking about AI healthcare.
The AI is entering into the health system, but not just into the health system, it's all the way down to the level of the patient. So the patient is able to talk in their local language and describe what's going on. And so in order to make this a reality, to see what works, what doesn't work. We're thrilled that OpenAI and the Gates Foundation are committing an initiative called Horizon 1000, where we'll go into 1,000 primary healthcare clinics in Africa, and you have different systems.
Can somebody please get this man the hell out of Africa? Somalia, by the way, which is where they had the oral polio outbreak because of the oral polio vaccines they gave, which is not even a secret, or the GMO failure that he did that completely destroyed the same GMO they later used in your vaccines. The same. It's just, get these people. These are not philanthropists. These are manipulators.
Systems that we have to connect into. Although not this initiative, there's obviously a lot going on in India as well. And so, over the next couple of years, I would expect developing world health may even get ahead of rich world because the need is so great, and the governments are embracing this and making sure that it's moving at full speed.
Did he really just call it rich world? That's just ridiculous. Hardly. I'm pretty sure that'll never happen because you guys won't allow it to happen, since it's all about your inner circle. But I hope I'm wrong. But either way, so here he's talking about AI healthcare. Well, you know who else is talking about AI healthcare? Oh, that's right. The guy standing right next to Larry Ellison in the Stargate Project. There's Sam Altman, OpenAI. But let's keep pretending like this globalist agenda that every one of them are representing is totally done and stopping. No, I don't think they need to make that any more clear. All the agendas around everything they're discussing are still very much in play and are all being led by people tied to the inner circle. It's not about Republicans alone or Trump in particular. It is about the government, and that this is his role. In fact, I think largely Trump is in this role, like we said in the last time, maybe because it's meant to collapse to justify the next thing, and it's easy to blame him for. I said that the very first moment he got elected. It seemed like a likely play, but here we are. I just think it's worth noting that these are all the things that they're like. If you talk to Alex Jones or listen to them, they'll tell you that Davos World Economic Forum is the central globalist. Yes, it's a huge part of it. And the fact that Trump goes and speaks every year should be pretty telling, despite the games they play with what he's out there shouting down. If you look at his agendas and what he's rolling out, whether AI or anything else, it's the same thing. And if you listen to Gates or the rest of them talk about what that means, and then look at Trump standing next to the people who are also working at that agenda, including himself and his own people, it shouldn't be that hard to recognize that it's all a game of manipulation and misdirection. Here's the World Economic Forum. AI and healthcare, buckle up for change, but read this before takeoff, 2024. Here's RFK Jr. back in July. He wants everyone to be using wearables, right? This is all the AI direction, same conversation, guys. Everybody, these are all small points, but I'm just trying to show you the continuity of it all. And also end with 2 points. Don't forget, Derek, James Corbett, TLAV in general, we put out the Bill Gates, Expose Bill Gates effort, which was one of the examples that showed you that we have reach that they don't want anybody to see. This became a global event. This happened all over the country and all over the world. It just didn't get a lot of attention. And this started largely with Derek in particular and Corbett. I'm only simply highlighting this to show you that there are people out there that are objective and nonpartisan, and we will call out anybody who we feel is dishonest, who is acting illegally, who is misrepresenting the truth, who is out there manipulating people with no voice, or just, whatever we feel is the justice needs to be served. And so whether it's left or right or all of it simultaneously, this is what we do. So when you have people out there right now who are trying to gaslight you into thinking that everything they're doing is, I guess, somehow magically what he promised a moment ago, despite that being just a mental gymnastics feat that it would be beyond anything I've ever seen before, recognize that there's plenty of us out there who are willing to call out left, right, all of it, anybody, media, anybody who's not actually standing on principle. And we'll work with people, whether we disagree on ultimate points, if we recognize that they're acting in a principled manner based on what they believe is the case. Bill Gates clearly is part of this agenda. And amazing that we can see the continual overlap of Trump with all the people that you guys told us. Jones told you, Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates are all going to be going down if we can just keep them alive. How's that working out? Got to start being honest about who's really manipulating out there. And Elon Musk being just welcomed right back. He never really left. It was all a game of, it's a shell game. It's what this becomes. But he is clearly still part of this administration and has been pushing right back into it. I'll leave you with this 2-minute video. It's longer than that. There's a lot more you could have included, but it's called Elon Checks All the Boxes. And it's just showing you that yet another example of these international or elitist inner circle part of this who aligns with every agenda from the Great Reset, from World Economic Forum discussions and anything else. How do we hide? How do people blind themselves to how clear this all is? Hopefully you can reach people with this individual clip or anything else. Just get the information out there, because I'll tell you, I think you'd be surprised how many people out there are open to information that you wouldn't expect today. A lot's changing. And if you only look at the people on Twitter or the mainstream alternative manipulators out there, you get a very different picture. Oh, thank you for tuning in today. I will see you tomorrow. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Nobody will be safe if not everybody is vaccinated.
Are you vaccinated, if I
Yes.
may ask?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very pro-vaccination. I believe the science is unequivocal.
Can you imagine that in 10 years when we are sitting here, we have an implant in our brains, and I can immediately feel, because you all will have implants. Just think of sensors planted into our brains.
Basically implanted in your skull. So, but it would be flush with your skull. So you basically take out a chunk of skull, put the Neuralink device in there. You'd put the electrode, you'd insert the electrode threads very carefully into the brain.
It doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you if you take a genetic editing. It's a fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological world. That's really the essence of the fourth industrial revolution.
A merger with biological intelligence and machine intelligence.
An effort for man to merge with machine in a healthy way.
Yes.
To beat machines, you basically have to merge with machines.
Most likely, yes.
As work is changing, is a universal basic income really a solution to this problem?
I think ultimately we will have to have some kind of universal basic income. And I think some kind of a universal basic income is going to be necessary.
Decarbonization of the economy.
Where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
I mean, my top recommendation, honestly, would be just to have a carbon tax.
This global